Hello. So, welcome to the first of, I hope to be many Oxford-style debates. In this debate, we are examining a question of how Western societies should deal with racial inequality in the 21st century. And we have showcased two views. One, I think, is broadly progressive, and the other one would be broadly alt-right. Is that an accurate characterization of?
That's
liberal
enough.
Progressive. That's fair. Liberal progressive.
Okay. I'll address you guys to bring you in. So we might have some trouble because we've had some sound issues. But given that, I'll just try to keep people on point. So again, this is a sort of modified Oxford debate. We'll have 4 sections, and then we're going to open up everything to people in the chat. I'll just tweet out the link to the chat, put it in the live chat, and people can come in. At that point, you guys have no obligation to stay. You guys can leave. But the stuff that is the formal debate will last for 1.5 hours. And I'll try to moderate as tightly as possible, but also in a way that will not let my own position show. Okay, so the question on the floor is, how should Western societies deal with racial inequality in the 21st century? Now, this doesn't have an affirmative or a negative side to it. You just answer the question as best you can, and we'll try to see where the differences lie. So for the first 2 sections, I'm not going to say really anything other than to bring people in, although I will keep track of time. Now, you guys can use all the time you want. If you don't use time in your opening arguments, it's going to be added on to your end. So you get 10 minutes at the beginning. If you don't use it all, I'll just add on to your closing statement. And during the cross-examination, I will essentially, and you can ask each other questions, but I'll make sure everyone gets an equal number of questions. And hopefully that will keep time relatively equal. At the end of the debate, I'll publish the time so people can see how much time people used. That doesn't really matter for any kind of who won the debate sort of deal, but I just want to make sure that people are aware how long people spent talking and the likes. Okay, guys, so do you feel comfortable with the rules, and do you guys want to start in on the debate then?
Yes.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so does anyone have a preference on going first? So this is not an affirmative, negative question, so it really doesn't matter.
I have no preference.
Nor do I.
Ryan, do you want to go first then?
I will go first. Okay.
Okay, so take up to 10 minutes and explain how Western societies should deal with race and racial inequalities in the 21st century. I'm not going to interrupt you at all. You can bring up anything.
Okay, thank you very much. Before talking about specific policies on race, there are a lot of underlying beliefs that go into policy that need to be dealt with. Whether they believed it or not, since the mid-1960s, most of what we call the West has embarked on programs of open immigration and racial integration that are based on the idea that there are no significant innate differences in the brain between the races. Physical, superficial differences, fine, but the brain is off limits. 50 plus years on, the policies that come from this outlook have had a failure rate of 100%. In the United States, whites pay on net about $2,800 more in taxes than they get in government services. Blacks on net receive about $10,000 more in government than they pay in taxes, and Hispanics receive about $7,300 more in government than they pay in taxes. Even if we remove their share of the military budget and assign all military spending to whites, whites would still on net pay $1,260 more dollars in taxes than they get from government. And even when assigning all military spending to whites, the blacks and Hispanics still contribute $598 billion to the budget deficit in 2014. Which is to say, the annual budget deficit of the United States is entirely a function of the Black and Hispanic population. And there is zero evidence that the presence of Black and Hispanics in any area increases white wages in that area. Having these people doesn't bump up white wages. I haven't investigated the fiscal impact of Arabs and Africans in continental European countries in detail, but all indicators point to them being a similar financial effect. Hillary Clinton had a slush fund foundation where she took money from foreign governments and large companies in exchange for influence. This kind of transparent buying of government by the powerful is rare in Western Europe, problematic in Eastern Europe, common in Latin America, and the norm in Africa, and this almost won, even though whites voted for Trump 58 to 37%. And if not for the Electoral College, which indirectly gives rural white voters power over brown urban voters, she would have won. The economic gaps between the races are the same everywhere, all throughout Latin America. Whites are somewhere at the top, mestizos, Amerindians in the middle, and the few blacks in these countries at the bottom. There is not a single country where this rank order differs. So the idea of a functional multiracial state so far has failed all tests. Racial integration just does not happen. So far, at least, the brute fact is that when you import the third world, you become the third world. Given this 100% failure rate, you would think it's time to reevaluate the underlying assumption of equality. It's a very strange assumption. First of all, you can tell someone's genetic ancestry just from looking at the shape of their brain. From a paper in Current Biology entitled Modeling the 3D Geometry of Cortical Surface with Genetic Ancestry, the authors write, quote, "Our data indicate that the unique folding patterns of Jarai and Sulci are closely aligned with genetic ancestry. The geometry robustly predicts each individual's genetic background, even though the population has been shaped by waves of migration and admixtures." A paper in Biomed entitled Different Level of Population Differentiation Among Human Genes found that the genes involved with the pituitary gland, neural column patterning, hindbrain development, regulation of neuron differentiation, and neuron development had higher levels of population ancestry differentiation than pigmentation, i.e. skin color, meaning the genes involved in neuron development, or at least some of them, have more racial differentiation than skin color. So given that you can tell someone's race by the shape of their brain, and that several genes known to influence neuron development differ by race more than the genes regulating skin color do, this makes the idea of equality of cognitive traits hard to just assume. Just yesterday, a paper was published showing that you can predict someone's big 5 personality traits just by looking at the shape and folding patterns of their brain. Lots of people have problems with IQ tests. Now, first off, IQ is a better predictor of job performance and lifetime income than education level is, okay? People use education level all the time to explain differences between groups and things. Well, IQ is actually better than that. IQ is also a good indicator of how smart someone is perceived to be. And more importantly, in group settings, the longer the interaction, the closer the relation between IQ and perceived intelligence is. The cultural bias argument on IQ tests is something that intelligence researchers, at least on surveys, don't take seriously at all. Racial gaps are smaller on arithmetic, verbal intelligence, and information tests than they are on the more abstract visual, spatial, and reasoning tests. Panels where experts pick what they think are culturally biased questions, on average, pick questions with smaller racial gaps than the overall test. And that includes that infamous saucer question. IQ tests also predict life outcomes similarly for racial groups, so their bias, these IQ tests, would have to line up fairly precisely with the rest of society. Two surveys of intelligence researchers, one from 1984, one from 2013, found that the median intelligence researcher thinks that the racial IQ gaps are about 50% down to genetics. Now, I think it's 80%, so I'm out of the mainstream, but it's just a matter of degree. Globally, the IQ gaps between races within countries match their economic standing, and they are the same everywhere. Blacks in the United Kingdom have an average IQ of 86, blacks in the US around 85. Mixed race populations have IQs intermediate between their racial compositions, all right, between the races they are composed of. Not only are their overall IQs intermediate, but the pattern is intermediate. For example, Europeans do better on verbal IQ tests than East Asians do, but East Asians do better overall on the rest of the IQ test. But mixed European East Asian hybrids, or HAPAs, have higher verbal IQs than East Asians, but lower verbal IQs than Europeans, but their overall IQ is between Europeans and East Asians. So not only is the overall score intermediate, but the pattern is intermediate. Poverty doesn't make much sense as an explanation, given that the bottom fifth of whites economically have higher IQs and SATs than the top fifths of blacks economically, and Eastern European countries, whose white populations have lower purchasing powers than US blacks or Hispanics, have IQs in the high 90s, sometimes as high as 100. In addition, genes for intelligence are beginning to be found. However, the molecular genetics information is something very complicated, and I will just have to outsource to an article on the all-type. There's no way to cover everything here, but we have articles on stereotype threats, stress, nutrition, breastfeeding, lead exposure, school quality, adoption studies, and many other things. And I'm certainly happy to talk about those things in the Q&A portion. But these overall differences, these overall numbers, as big as they are, is a very crude, gross way to look at this. Whites do better on the more difficult IQ test questions and on the more abstract questions. If you had an IQ test that just had the top 25% most difficult questions and that was limited to the more abstract questioning, right, such as matrices, object assembly, and object orientation, stuff like that, and basic, more abstract reasoning questions, the gap would be 27 points, not 15 points. The result being that there is far less overlap on these kinds of abstract and difficult questions, and even less overlap intergenerationally due to a phenomenon known as regression to the mean, where on average, each generation of exceptionally bright or dim members of a racial group regress about halfway back to their racial mean. Okay, and this fact has actually been used by creationists to argue against evolution, but it doesn't regress all the way, and it only happens once for any individuals. Moreover, as Putnam and many replications of Putnam's work has shown, racial diversity decreases social trust and makes people less happy within a society, causes them more often to bowl alone, as was the title of his work. Even those individuals or even groups like East Asians who have high IQs and are not a financial drain, maybe even a financial benefit, will still vote differently than whites, voting for liberal or really what we should call third worldist policies that are antithetical to the legalized monogamy, strict property laws, and consistent application of laws, and that don't favor swings in public sentiment or popular figures. Now, for now, you can imagine that these political differences between groups are totally down to non-genetic factors. Well, that's a bit speculative. We know with twin studies that about half of the variation within the whole population on political views is about 50% down to genetics. So to just assume that the race differences in political views, right, which are the same everywhere. Blacks in Britain vote Labor, blacks in Canada vote Liberal, Hispanics vote Communist wherever they are. That's a bit of an exaggeration. But to say that these are totally environmental is pure speculation. And whether the political differences are environmental or genetic and in what proportions is an academic question today. Because right now, nobody has shown a proven way to change the views of these groups to be more in line with the unique classical liberalism that distinguishes white European peoples. In real terms, I'm talking about the people who would vote for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump. That's third world. That's the death of the West. Right now, race differences in political views are acting as if there's something like 80% genetic and basically fixed, even if perhaps technically there is a higher proportion that is environmental and malleable. We don't need to be having an on-case policy discussion, and we certainly don't need to be having any kind of philosophical discussion about race until we established what it is we're even talking about. And I'm finished.
All right, great. You have 19 seconds left on the clock, and I'm going to go, pardon me, we're now going to go to Killing the Breeze. You have 10 minutes to make your case. Unperturbed, use as much time as you like, and the time you do not use will be added to the end for anything you want. So go right ahead, answer the question, how should Western societies deal with race and racial inequality in the 21st century?
Sure, absolutely. Well, the first thing we should do is have a clear definition of race. While it's honestly believe that race is a quote unquote social construct, there are differences between people, and those differences should either be highlighted or otherwise known as be, for lack of a better term, emphasized and actually celebrated. So the first way we dealing with race and dealing with racial inequality in the 21st century is to have a clear definition of race. I define race as ethnicity without the blandness, I should say. Ethnicity without the qualifier. So basically you have people that are from different places that define themselves in different ways. Racial inequality, on the other hand, is something that happens based upon perception. How Western society should deal with race is one way. That's obviously through education, and that can be addressed through schools, that can be addressed through continuing education, through secondary education. Racial inequality can only be dealt with through policy. And the policy has to deal with the perceived differences between us and how we go about rectifying them. For instance, people of color and minorities across Western Europe and United States believe that they face more discrimination than do the white majority. That difference has to be rectified. How we rectify that difference is through experience. What has to happen is we have to, for lack of a better term, put on each other's shoes. So studies showing that, you know, black people and white people are treated differently by police, by education authorities, by banks, by anything that's in power, the law, the government. We have to kind of show that those differences either aren't as bad as minorities are making them out to be, or B, are as bad as the ruling class or the majority thinks they aren't. I mean, there are all sorts of statistics and surveys that have been taken that show that in spite of household income, in spite of the education gap, in spite of the wealth gap that persists, many people in the majority, read white people if you want to, will say that things aren't that bad for minorities. And that gap has to be, in other words, addressed. But really, I mean, the news isn't bad all the way around. I mean, to quote one of my least favorite presidents, I think a lot of it is staying the course. A lot of the policies that we've enacted have been incredibly successful as far as dealing with racial inequality. If you want to talk about programs specifically in the West, specifically in the United States, we've seen all sorts of gains for minorities post, you know, civil rights. Really, if you want to go all the way back post slavery, that have put people of color in leadership positions, that have put people of color in positions where they can determine their own destiny, even though they are minorities within a majority country. So, what kind of the backlash that we have to these policy prescriptions are people who've always been in power who feel threatened now because they don't have the monopoly on the power, which is actually a good thing. Equality kind of feels like tyranny to people who've been unequal as far as the balance of power is concerned, who've had kind of a greater slice of the pie as far as the balance of power is concerned. So we need to continue with liberal progressive policies that kind of sort of squash the excesses of capitalism, which of course contribute to racial inequality even more. At the same time, protect personal freedoms such as voting rights, which also add to the imbalance of the system. There's no real one size fits all solution to having different people from different backgrounds with different histories fit together. But what we do know is that ideas coming from different people and different backgrounds with different thought processes do indeed contribute to a more robust, a more egalitarian society. If you got ideas coming from 10 white guys as opposed to ideas coming from an Asian guy, an Indian guy, a white guy, a black woman, a Jewish woman, a Muslim woman, and so on and so forth, you're going to get more robust ideas. I think the real issue and the real turning point, which is sort of what we're seeing happening right now, is that internal conversation that's going to happen within the majority, read white people. You have white people that are questioning the history that has happened in the West and particularly in America. You have white people who are saying, hey, this is unfair. Hey, we did treat these people badly and we should do something about that. And so those kinds of discussions should be fostered and continued. So what we have is a situation where dealing with race, I don't necessarily even know if that's something that society, as far as policy can be dealt with, that has to be dealt with through education, namely in defining what race is and how it impacts us. But with racial inequality, sure, the policy prescriptions that we've been going, and then the policy prescriptions that have been enacted, and actually a lot stronger ones, which were coming down the pipeline, which will hopefully have just been derailed, at least in the United States, for the next 2 years, including immigration, including climate change, including more focus on the rights of women and the rights of people of color, will eventually make racial inequality not necessarily a thing of the past, but something that we can say we're dealing with. We can say that we're dealing with it now, but what's happening is that the backlash from the people who are quote unquote suffering from the, I guess the evening out, are kind of drowning out the voices of those who are saying, hey, things are great now, which happen to be mainly minorities. So what will generally happen in the 21st century, I believe, is people get younger, as younger people continue to take over the roles of government and finance and law and technology, is that these things will wipe themselves out. You're always going to have people questioning the humanity of other people and questioning whether people should have a right to what they have a right to. But what you can't deny is that people, as people interact with people, as people more or less meet people from different backgrounds in theirs, they're going to recognize their humanity and they're going to move forward with policies, with actions, with intentions that are going to say, hey, I'm a human, you're a human, and we're going to be able to live in this world together. You see the what's happened in Western Europe and what's happened in the United States right now is actually a good thing. These shocks, these reverberations from different people coming to different places and settling is one of those things where those who have are going to have to deal with those who traditionally haven't. And that evening out of the playing field is going to be rocky. I expect rockiness. We've had hundreds of years of colonialism that have kind of sort of made what we have obviously not even or fair. So as that evening and that fairness becomes sort of the way of life, you're going to have those who are traditionally on top complain, and that's fine. Complaints are good. Complaining is fantastic. We should be able to hear from everybody. But that's not going to stop progress. And then the question being, how should societies deal with race and racial inequality? Progress means everyone, no matter your background, no matter your race, no matter your ethnicity, has the same opportunity and the same kind of sort of, I guess, for lack of a better term, the same path to, life, liberty, and
1
pursuit of
minute.
happiness, to use an American document. But yeah, I'm working, and even answering the question, I'm working under the assumption that we believe that everybody is a human being and that everybody has the same capabilities and the same more or less opportunities, or not opportunities, but the same ability to be able to succeed. Other than that, we don't have any real differences between us, no matter other than, physiologically, which again can be attributed to getting a definition of race, which again is going to differ from person to person, which can be adjudicated through the education system. And so that's more or less where I am.
Okay, great. You have 5 seconds left. So thank you very much. So now we can return to the cross-examination section of the debate. So in this section of an Oxford-style debate, people will ask each other questions from across the aisle. Again, usually there's a form for who goes first because there's an affirmative and negative, but since there is neither in this debate, would anyone like to ask the first question to their opponent?
Sure, I would love to.
Go right.
Ryan, do you believe that people of color are lesser than white people?
That's a matter of opinion. I mean, basically everyone prefers their own. Like, for example, first off, people prefer their own children to the children of others, and they prefer people who are similar to them in all sorts of ways to people who are dissimilar from them. So obviously, on average, am going to prefer, white people to non-white people because I'm white. I mean, that's just reality, right? Blacks prefer blacks over whites. I mean, this is just
it's not a matter of preference.
Birds of a feather.
Well, I'm not asking about preference. I'm asking, do you think a white person is equal to a black person? Do you think an Asian person is equal to a white person? Do you think a Latino person is equal to a white person?
Not in height, not in not in skin melanin. I mean, I don't know what, like this thing about equal, it's kind of a modern bugaboo. The thing is, I don't know how to answer this question because I don't think in those terms. I don't think in terms of something being higher or lower than any, like there's traits, right? Humans have traits, like a big basket of traits, okay? And the traits differ. You can value whatever it is you want to value, but I'm not gonna,
So when our American forefathers said all men are created equal, as hypocritical as they were, you would say that no, all men are not created equal. There is a social hierarchy with white people on top.
Well, first off, the founders didn't. The first Naturalization Act that the founders had referred to getting a country that only allowed free white men of good character. At the very beginning. So from the outset, and also, there's a great article by Jared Taylor called "What the Founders Really Thought About Race." The founders were white nationalists. I mean, they didn't have that term back then. They didn't need to have that term back in because that was the default.
Well, it's obvious the founders were white nationalists from the way they treated women and the way they treated slaves. But this is American Renaissance, Jared Taylor.
Why did you bring up?
Absolutely.
Why did you bring up women? No,
I'm just saying, as far as white nationalists are concerned.
Well, how is certain treatment about women, how's that a white nationalist thing? Right.
Oh, well, we can even trace white nationalism to their influence in the men's rights movement right now. There's certainly a great grounding in there, but I mean, we're talking about race now, so we don't have to go to sex. But yeah, there's certainly white nationalism that goes with the. I think
what you're pointing out is there are views in the past. Certainly, you could say there's a whole bunch of things people in the past thought. You could talk about the religiosity that they had in the past that white nationalists today, by and large, don't have. Okay, so you could say the founders were white nationalists. They were also religious. Therefore, white nationalists today must be religious.
Well, I don't know if they were national. I don't know if they were actually religious.
Well, they were.
I don't know if they were actually religious.
At the very least.
Yeah, they were deists. I would agree with that. I would definitely agree they were deists.
But more importantly, the society at the time was, broadly speaking, I mean, the elite is always going to have some different views from the general public, but the general population at the time we would describe as, white nationalists in terms of wanting a white-only country, and
would you consider?
And if you talk about, like, for example, even like slavery, like a bunch of people in the North, one of the reasons they didn't want to have slavery is because they didn't want to have any blacks at all in the United States.
Sure, and there was also an economic advantage given to the South over slavery as well. It's not like they were paying taxes or anything like that on their slaves. What we have is, I guess what I'm leading to. Sure.
What I don't know.
Sure.
Economic advantage, like they didn't pay taxes. Slave owners didn't pay taxes, or
no, they didn't pay they didn't pay taxes on slaves. They were person to person. There wasn't a tax levied on slave trading. Of course, they paid taxes. Taxes have been levied since Washington began.
Okay, okay. Well, if you say so.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not if I say so. It's what it is. It's a matter of. Yeah, it's a matter of just, looking at slave auctions and slave trades.
Well, okay.
But I guess what my question leads to is, I mean, do you consider yourself a racist? Do you think whites are superior?
What's your gimmick with that? What like, for example, let's say something is racist. Does that make it incorrect?
I don't know.
Does it? Well, you're bringing up racist. You're using the term racist, not me.
I just asked if you were a racist, and you asked what my gimmick was. I thought that was a yes or no question.
You're the one. Well, now you ask me what I think racist means, but you're the one pushing.
No, I just asked, are you a racist? And then you said what your gimmick was, and I was like, I don't know.
Why don't you tell me?
Just asking, are you a racist?
Why don't you tell me your personal view of racist? What you think that means? Because everyone and their mom and their dog has their own personal definition of what is and isn't tagged racism. So just tell me what that is.
The belief in the superiority of one race over another.
Okay, well then no.
And policy and acts and treatment accordingly.
Well, you had to say and the first part I said no to, so no. There you go.
What was the first part you said no to?
Superiority, because I don't believe in superiority or inferiority. Those are all personal values. I don't.
You don't think whites are superior. You just prefer them, even though they aren't superior.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Why do you prefer whites then?
Because they're like me, and they are the engine of what we call Western civilization. Without whites, the world would be as it was in the year 1500, as it was in 1000, as it was in 0 AD, as it was in 1000 AD. The world was profoundly stagnant and Malthusian, had an average per capita income about $500 per head, be it in Africa, be it in China. That was the subsistence farmer.
And then white people came along and just changed all of that.
Correct.
There's no
Correct.
no influence of Asians, no influence from Africans, no influence from anybody else. It was just white people were just the engine that drove that.
The white people were the primary engine that drove that. Now, Chinese especially had some influence on European technological development, Indians and Arabs. But the thing is, the importance of Indians, Arabs, and Chinese on what I call the Great European Explosion, where basically Europe went out and basically conquered the whole world and created the modern world as we know it. Using
Chinese gunpowder, right?
That influence from these other countries came, like that influence that they had acted through Europe, acted through whites. I think gunpowder was independently invented in multiple places, but whatever.
I think it was, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was China, but that's neither here nor there. I guess I talk with so many people who are like you. I guess, what would you consider yourself, like an ethno-nationalist? I guess that's what Richard Spencer's calling himself now. He's not a Nazi. He's not a neo-Nazi. He's an ethno-nationalist.
Well,
would I be correct in saying that that's what you consider yourself to be?
The term, like, the thing is, basically what I want to do is and I haven't done this yet, is what I want to do is I want to set up a full-on a name for specifically what it is I believe. Because the problem is, if I say I am a white nationalist, people then go, oh, so you believe in what the Aryan Brotherhood said, or you believe in what these people say. And I don't want that to happen. I want a specific thing for specifically what I believe. And I don't want to give myself a label, because then someone else who also identifies with that label can go off and say something, and then I'm like sort of tied to that, And I don't really want to be that way. I want to have my own thing. So now, if you want to know, here's what I'll say. My views on race are probably most closely in line. I'll probably use a historical figure as probably the best way to describe it. Someone like Winston Churchill, or someone like, frankly, someone like Washington, or someone like, trying to think of somebody. Maybe, yeah. Basically, like what the founders thought about race. That's basically my.
So you would like to go back. So you would like to go. Your views on race, you would say, are 275 to 300 years old.
Oh,
that's what you would like to go back to.
They are older than that. They go back. I mean, like.
Well, at least as far as we said, the founders.
Racial identity is founded. I mean, there's studies showing racial preference in infants. Okay, this is something that goes back. This is something that is primordial. This is
sure.
way older than the founders. But no, obviously you can't turn back the clock and say, I'm absolutely against slavery, against any form, serfdom, feudalism, anything like that, right? And so
what about apartheid? It seems like Jim Crow would be right up your alley, like a kind of separate states. Seeing that whites prefer whites and black prefer blacks.
Jim Crow, unfortunately, did not have a full separation. Jim Crow had two different nations that were enmeshed with each other, trying to control the same regions. Okay, and as it happened at the time being, whites got the upper hand and kept the other nation down. But it's a mess.
Well, whites always had the upper hand, though, right? Mm-hmm. It's not like coming out of slavery, blacks had any kind of upper hand. We had 12 years.
That's actually debatable. There was a period,
12 years of Reconstruction.
There was a period very briefly, I know, in Mississippi, where I believe blacks were the majority in Mississippi, and they won elections, and then whites found
well, now population-wise, yeah, that's population-wise. They're going to be southern states where there are more black people than white people, certainly. But as far as who had the advantage,
not anymore.
But then, absolutely, as far as who had the advantage. pretty much without Reconstruction, the South evolved back into, you know, what it was really post-slavery, with black codes and black people being lynched and killed or whatever. But yeah, the Reconstruction period was great. We had black people in government in like the 1870s. That's amazing.
Okay, well, the thing is, you bring up the lynching thing, and I think that's kind of an important thing, because if you look at the statistics on the number of whites who were lynched and the number of blacks who were lynched, once you control for the relative population of blacks in the South, the lynch mobs were basically no more racially biased than the current criminal justice system is, because the proportion of, because basically I had an article on this. I'm going off of memory. It's basically 3 times.
Sure.
Blacks are about 3 times more likely to go to prison for a violent crime today than a white person. Or
sure.
Their multiplier, and they were also about 3 times more likely to be lynched if they were in the South. So now, what does that mean? Does that mean that the current criminal justice system is horribly racist, and that basically the Klan, you know, they're just wearing different robes, they're wearing the black robes instead of the white robes? Or does it mean that maybe the lynch mobs weren't as racially biased as my thing? I mean,
well, the lynch mob, we would agree that the lynch mobs were white people, right? There weren't we aren't talking about groups of black people lynching black people and white people, right? We're talking about white people determining,
yeah, but you could say the same thing about the current. You could say the same thing about the majority of cops and the majority of judges.
Yeah, sure, they're all white people, absolutely. Yeah, the criminal justice system is dominated by white people, as well as government and technology. I mean, what you're saying is correct.
But I think,
as far as this being a white country, what I don't understand is
to draw, though.
What I don't understand is where this idea that minorities are ruining this white country for you. Like a lot of the things that have happened in this country are a result of people of color.
I explained 2 very clear things. One is how they're voting, and 2 is the budget impact. So those are 2 very clear things. Now you can say, you may think that, oh no, the way they're voting is fantastic. You know, we need, you know, Donald Trump is the next coming of Hitler. You can say all those things, all right, but you should at least know where I'm coming from, even if you think I'm totally wrong.
I know exactly where you're coming from. I know exactly where you're coming from. I think the problem is you're not acknowledging why minorities vote the way that they do.
Well, they vote the way that they do.
You're also making some really, really, really like exaggerations and kind of, for lack of a better term, stereotypes as far as how minorities vote and why. You had 1 in 5 black men that voted for Trump this time around.
I don't think so. I think
1 in 5 black men voted for Trump. 20% of black men voted for Trump. Absolutely. This is what I'm talking. This is what I mean by education. We have all sorts of misconceptions about what minorities are and what minorities aren't. And I think the problem is, as white people, as a white person, you haven't had to have any kind of experience
88 to 8. I just looked it up in New York Times.
88 to 8 what? That's black people. That's not black males. Black males voted for Trump at a 1 in 5 clip.
Well,
yeah,
I don't. Do you have a link?
You can look that up.
Do you have a source?
You can look that up, or we can do it. We can take all of our claims afterwards and see what it is.
But still,
this is what I'm saying. This goes
5 to 1 is still going to give Hillary Clinton every state. So even what you're saying is not,
No, sure it is, but you're saying all minorities vote this way because you're saying minorities are boom. Do you not know how
generalizations work? Do you not know how averages work?
And I'm saying you're generalizing.
Do we need to describe?
And I'm saying you're generalizing, and you can't really do that when your generalizations are wrong.
So my
25%, like 22% of Latinos voted for Trump.
So my generalization that blacks overwhelmingly vote Democrat is incorrect because some.
No, your generalization that blacks overwhelmingly vote Democrat because they're a drain on the swamp, they're a drain on society is wrong. Your generalization that Latinos vote for socialists is dead wrong, especially since 22% of them voted for Trump this time around.
So 22%.
Your generalization that Asian
did not vote for a socialist, therefore
I wouldn't call Hillary Clinton I wouldn't call Hillary Clinton a socialist. I would have to ask you if you know what a socialist is.
They voted for the closest thing they could get. Okay, and that's Hillary
No,
Clinton,
not the
sadly,
closest thing.
in the
Not the
United
closest thing.
States.
Not the closest thing they should get. You should talk to Latinos. You should talk to Black people. Talk to Asians. The quote unquote model minority. I talk to them all the time.
Okay.
And the reason why they vote Democrat is not because they're in line with the ideals of the Democratic Party. A lot of it is the rhetoric on immigration from the Republicans.
Right. So now when
A lot of
two
Asians
football teams playing each other. Let's say Alabama plays Auburn. Okay. And you're
Sure.
gonna describe that football game to somebody. Do you describe like the highlights or like the big plays or whatever? No, that's stupid.
Mhm.
What you're gonna look at is you're gonna like what was the score? What was the box score? What were the yards? What was the overall thing? You can say, well, so Alabama is not actually a better team than Auburn because Auburn scored 7 points. Sure, Alabama scored 35, but Auburn scored 7. Therefore, to say that Alabama is better than Auburn is a generalization, right? And saying, blacks voted. It's a generalization.
Sure it is. That's just one game. Alabama plays Auburn every year. You got to look at the entire history. That's your problem. You're looking at things now. You're not looking at the entire history of what's happened and what's led up to now.
Okay.
If Alabama beats Auburn 35-7 this year, but Auburn won the previous 13 games, to say that Alabama is better than Auburn is just foolish.
That's wonderful. Now, I want to go over a few things. You sort of spit off a few things in your things, and
sure,
so
absolutely.
The first thing talked about was oh shit. Let me find it. I wrote down what you said here. Okay, you said loans. You said that blacks are discriminated against regarding loans. The problem with that, for any given credit score, blacks and Hispanics are actually less likely to pay back a loan. Okay, so like despite rejecting,
but you can't go with a loan based upon what's most likely to happen in their race or whatever. You have to take the credit score as what it is, which is why we have all sorts of people losing lawsuits and having to pay discrimination suits because of that.
Okay, but the thing is, you're assuming that the credit score captures all the information. See, the thing is,
you're assuming that somebody's race captures their information, though. Like, you can't do that. You can't do that. I have an incredible credit score, and I'm black. So, like, if I'm denied a loan if I'm denied a loan not because of my credit score but because of my race, that's obviously racial discrimination. We already have suits that are
banks engage in racial discrimination because if they did not engage in racial discrimination, they would go under. Okay.
Well, banks are not allowed to engage in racial discrimination, though. That's the point.
Well, they're able to get away with enough of it. Okay, so
that's what we want to eliminate.
You want to know something interesting? Black-owned banks actually are more discriminatory against blacks than white-owned banks are. And of course, my belief.
Discriminatory how? What does that mean? Discriminatory how?
They're more likely.
Who are they discriminating for blacks are?
Black banks are more likely to reject blacks at a higher rate for a given credit score than white banks are.
So what are you saying? They're rejecting blacks in favor of who?
Whites.
How many whites are shopping? How many whites are doing business at black-owned banks?
Let me.
See that this is the problem. You're trying to equalize things that aren't equal. That aren't equal. Here's the thing: if you're a bank and you have a credit score of a black applicant and a credit score of a white applicant and a credit score of that black applicant is higher, then you can't do that. You're comparing black-owned banks who don't nearly have the capital or aren't entrenched in the system as white-owned banks. I mean, how are they equal? They aren't. You're trying to make them equal, but they aren't.
Just to note, you have 10 minutes left, and hold on. If you have links, send them to me. I'll put them in the window afterwards. Okay.
Okay. I sent one link in the description. I actually have a page with a whole bunch of links for my opening thing. I had a hard time following what Quasi was saying. Next thing you talked about how there's progress made on segregation. What a lot of people don't know is that residential segregation in the United States is actually higher than it was in the 1970s. Now,
housing's a problem.
Now, so residential segregation has actually increased. School segregation has increased, and that's not even like that. That is not controversial like at all. That's just a brute statistical fact. The housing segregation thing is a bit more because basically what they used to do is they say, oh, look, this city is X% Hispanic. This city is X%. So the city is getting more diverse. But if you actually look at a neighborhood level, the neighborhood level segregation is actually higher than it has ever been since 1960.
Which is why I'm so happy the Supreme Court addressed disparate impact housing last year. And now you have to ask those questions. Are you discriminating against somebody that doesn't live in this, that has traditionally no foothold in this area? And if you're doing so, why? In other words, if there are no Asians that live in this neighborhood and an Asian family tries to move in, you're going to be scrutinized as to why you aren't going to let this Asian family move in.
Sure, but anyway, the point I was making is
that's what I'm saying.
You're talking about progress, and such progress is actually not happening.
The progress is definitely happening. I just told you. I just told you what happened with the Supreme Court.
You talked about a law. We'll see if that actually has any impact.
Are you questioning if the Supreme Court is the law of the land?
To go. I'm questioning whether or not it's going to have the impact you think it's going to have. Because similar laws so far have not had those impacts. Anyway,
sure they have. Sure they have. The reason why schools are so segregated. I don't know about more segregation. I don't know about more segregation as far as from when Jim Crow.
I have an article on segregation that I think the audience should look at some of the numbers on that. Another thing to talk about is colonialism. There's a problem with that. Countries that had more European presence, had more colonialism, measured both in terms of years of European rule and how many Europeans settled there as a proportion of the population. Those countries ended up wealthier than those without European settlement. And that is true both for, obviously, the white people there, but for the blacks there. The richest blacks in Africa, okay, I'm not averaging the whites and the blacks to get a higher average. I'm talking about just the blacks in these countries. The blacks in
I'm not sure what wealth has to do with.
The blacks in South Africa are the wealthiest people on the continent of Africa.
I'm not sure what wealth has to do with rights and the ability to.
Well, you talk about
treated equally.
You talk about rights. Like, one thing a lot of people don't realize is when Europe,
there are a lot of rich countries that are racist as hell.
When Europe entered these countries, these African kingdoms and in India, they were going into feudal states, right? Nobody there had rights as you know them. These were not nation states. They were not democratic. Okay, so
I dispute that. I feel like they may not have been democratic, but they certainly had their own forms and system of government that certainly worked for them. You can even look at the impact of the Ottoman Empire on Europe.
Of course.
Yeah, are you calling the Ottomans white people?
Of course, they had their impact.
Yeah, for instance,
of course,
are we calling the Ottomans white people?
What you're saying is that African governments had government, what
I'm saying is that African governments had government that was far more advanced than what you're trying to make it out to be.
I don't know what you mean by advanced.
You're trying to make it seem primitive. You're trying to make it seem backwards. I mean, there's no such thing. There was a hierarchy of government.
Most of them didn't have writing, so you can infer whatever it is you want.
I'm not sure where that comes from.
Okay.
There's certainly ways to communicate, like written and verbally. Again, you have your links that I'm sure are coming from American Renaissance and other white nationalist, white supremacist sites. I'll have my links, and then people can confuse.
While I am not a big fan of peer review, most of my links actually come from, peer review journals. Right. I'm not a fan of peer review, but as it happens, that's where most of these links come from. This is not a white nationalist thing. This is just.
Sure, it is. You referenced Jared Taylor as the basis of your argument of your research,
as the basis of the views of the founders. That is the one thing of Jared Taylor.
Which you said were your views. Right.
What do you?
You said the views of the founders were your views.
I said they're the closest approximation. Right.
Well, you said they were your views before. You didn't say they were the closest approximation. You said they were your views.
Okay. Well, I'm clarifying.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Clarifying at this moment. So now, for your point of view, that's what I think. They are the closest approximation that I can think of on the spot.
Yeah, but I'm not sure.
In addition, for colonialism, European countries that had bigger colonial empires relative to their population size, they were not any wealthier than European countries that did not have colonial empires. In fact, they were slightly poorer. Okay, Germany ended up being one of the richest countries on the planet, didn't have hardly any colonial empires. So this idea that colonialism made Africa poor, when in fact Africa's per capita GDP
Who said colonialism made Africa poor? No one said that. No one said colonialism made Africa poor. You just made that up. I said colonialism is one of the main reasons why people of color feel that what's happening now, and particularly in regards to how the people in the majority, you can read that as white people, are feeling about their rights and their quote unquote place in the hierarchy being threatened, is justified.
Yeah.
That's like, for instance, the Native Americans were here. Native Americans were here. Native Americans weren't. They didn't measure their happiness in wealth.
No, I want to respond to what you said about colonialism. Because you were talking.
Okay, but can I finish? You didn't let me finish.
No, you were going on.
You brought up colonialism and you made something up.
You were going on to a new tangent. Let's settle this.
No. You said colonialism. The idea that colonialism made Africa poor. No one ever said that. You just made that up.
No, well, no. I think you basically said that. Okay.
No, when did I basically say it?
You're talking about inequality. You were talking about inequalities between the races. Okay. And then you mentioned colonialism.
Racial inequality is not just measured in wealth, though. No one ever said anything about poor. You kind of sort of just made that up.
Guys, hold on here.
You're not talking about
focus on question and answers, not who said what. Ask a question and then answer it. Let's not relitigate who said what. The chat can decide that.
Okay.
Fine.
Sure.
Right. Whatever.
Sure. Yeah, racial inequality, that doesn't necessarily mean, people of color have less money than white people. There's all sorts of societal things that contribute to racial inequality. It's not just money. It seems that you're focused on wealth and money, which of course is a lot of people are, but inequality isn't just money.
Wealth and money is because that's something where you can get hard numbers on, right? When people say that they're being discriminated against, or, my boss is treating me poorly because I'm black, or, my neighbors aren't talking to me, it must be because I'm black, not because I'm an asshole.
But why do you think discrimination can just be quantified with hard numbers, though? I don't understand that. We already know that's not the case.
If you're not going to quantify it with hard numbers, then
we already know that's not the case.
Anybody can just say whatever it is they want. Anybody can just say.
That's what we want, right? That's America. That's Western democracy. That's the ideal, right? Anybody can say whatever it is that they want.
I don't think you understand the sense in which I use that term. I mean,
I understand the sense.
No, you don't. I'm saying you get to just make stuff up. You get to say.
What do you mean make stuff up? If it's either going to be green or it is not.
I feel that I am discriminated against. Here's a little story from like a single anecdote or single event of some white guy treating me unfairly. Therefore, this is why black people are, poor and stuff. All right, it's asinine, and it's just endless storytelling.
Why is it asinine? I don't understand why it's asinine.
It's asinine for the same reason that someone trying to describe a football game pointing to highlights versus pointing to the box score.
I don't think that analogy works. Are you a football fan? I'm not sure that analogy works. Like life is not football.
Works just fine. You just don't understand.
Life is not football. Like in life, there isn't a final score of points.
Understand it.
There isn't a final score of points. Nor is there. I don't understand what you're talking about.
Let's take another analogy. Let's take military. Okay, let's say you pointed to like World War II. You pointed to a specific area where, look, the Germans, they're absolutely blowing the hell out of the Americans and the British, right? Therefore, the Germans are going to win the war. No, they got creamed in the war. Okay, and so what you're doing with like these little anecdotes. Okay,
but they aren't anecdotes though. This is actually what happens.
Okay, guys, you're out of time, but I'm going to give you 5 more minutes to finish up this line of thought, okay? So take 5, okay?
Yeah, these aren't anecdotes, though. This is... Go ahead.
Can you unmute yourself now? Ryan, can you unmute yourself? Okay. Well, Killing the Breeze, you want to respond to that? Okay, you're back. Yeah, I just muted you because this is technically the end of the cross-examination. I'm appending 5 minutes to finish this line of questioning out.
Okay, yeah, you were talking about, so how are we doing this? Is this 5 minutes where are we still questioning one another?
He hasn't unmuted himself.
Okay. Or we're still questioning one another though?
Okay, I'm mute. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So to unmute yourself, just click the little red icon.
Yes.
Muting and unmuting should be fast because I'll use it to cut off people when they run out of time. So hopefully it won't be a 5-minute delay. But I'm appending 5 minutes now just to finish this line of conversation, even though you are technically out of time. So I guess, do you want to finish this? Do you want to continue to question and answer or take the 5 minutes?
Yeah, Ryan, go ahead. Finish your thoughts on how racism and discrimination is just anecdotal.
Yeah, go ahead. Let's finish that.
Well, the thing is, like the evidence that you're putting forth is all basically people's personal lived experiences, and people have all sorts of different personal lived experiences. And if we just do, like, people can experience anything. You need to have statistics. You need to look at overall data about things, right? And use operationalized, quantified things. All right. That's what we do in basically every other field where we get something, right? We understand the fallacy of anecdotes in sports. We understand the fallacy of anecdotes by pointing to specific battles in wars. Okay. So it should be pretty clear why using anecdotes here would be silly.
But why do you think this is anecdotal, though? For instance, you have 88% of black people who feel that they're discriminated against, whereas only 56% of white people think that black people are discriminated against.
No.
I don't get that.
Okay, that's
I don't get why you think this racial discrimination.
You're conflating two different things there. All right, the fact that the overwhelming majority of blacks feel that they are discriminated against, that is a hard fact that can be found from surveys. Okay.
Whereas a majority of white people feel the same way. That is a
different question from whether or not they actually are. Okay, those are two very different questions.
Who determines if they actually are, though?
That's what we try to figure out through the use of data, not through storytelling. Because storytelling
but this isn't about storytelling, though. Like the use of data, like the analyzation of that data. Who does that? For instance, data would suggest that.
I do that analyzation. You think I'm biased? That's fine. We link to all sorts of sources.
Data suggested at one point that
anyone else can do it and tell me if I'm cherry picking, if I'm leaving stuff out. That's why we are totally transparent. In fact, we use Sci-Hub on our site a lot because we want people to see the sources that we see. We don't want any of our sources to be behind paywalls.
So what number quantifies that? What number quantifies that people of color are discriminated against or not discriminated against? You're saying that.
Well, first off, people of color is like, I don't know. When someone says Gentile, basically you can tell that they're anti-Jewish because they're using a term that for everyone else but Jews. And what you're doing is using a term for everyone else but whites. So people of color, I don't know if you.
We're in a discussion. We're talking about race. We're talking about race.
But when you say when you say people of color, that's kind of a sacralization thing. But whatever.
Okay.
Look, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff about this. For example, when people say loans, well, I say no. There's not loan discrimination. All right. Banks are actually acting.
You just admitted earlier there was loan discrimination. You said banks had to discriminate or else they go under.
You are correct. I said that incorrectly. That you're actually correct about that. No, but how about this? Unfair discrimination. Banks are not engaging in any unfair
What's fair discrimination?
They're fairly discriminating because the payback rates for loans for blacks and whites as they exist today are the same.
But we don't use race as a determination of. We don't use race as a determination of payback. That's what credit scores are for.
No, but see, credit scores.
If we were to use race as a determination,
credit scores over predict blacks' ability to repay.
The credit score does that's exactly what a credit score is supposed to do. It shows whether you pay your bills back on time or not.
Yes, that is what it's supposed to do. But the thing is, a credit score tells you what people did in the past. Going forward, race is also a predictor as well.
So in that case, no one should ever do a deal with a white person because history has shown us that white people will take over everything that they have. If you give them your house, they're going to want your second house and your car or whatever. You can't use race to predict the future. That's ridiculous.
Banks, that's exactly what banks do. That's exactly what
that is ridiculous.
I mean,
we cannot use race to predict the future. That's ridiculous. If that were the case,
they do. Like,
And then if that were the case in the 1960s or 70s, like there would be loans going everywhere to black people because there've been a proliferation of black millionaires and even black billionaires.
So
they would be the people to do business with.
I'm afraid that we're out of time for this segment. So I know there's a lot of stuff to unpack, but we're now going to head into question and answers. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys a few questions of my own.
Sure.
From what I'm thinking, and then after I ask about 2 or 3 questions, I'm going to go to the chat. Just type your questions in, guys. I'll read them as they come up, but I can't guarantee you I'll see yours. Okay, so can I start with Ryan? Are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, great. So I'd like to start by asking you a question. So essentially, I was kind of surprised that I think the question that was really in the resolution wasn't completely answered. You went along about a lot about race realism, but I'm curious. I still don't have an idea what you think the solution is to racial inequality in the 21st century, even if all those facts are true that you made the case for in your introduction.
Okay, well, I'll answer my question, presuming everything that I say is correct.
Yeah, fair enough.
Basically, racial separation as much as is practicable. Now, ideally, and the problem is it's kind of a pipe dream in the United States. People are very connected to the idea of America, that the candy cane flag and all the lore about America, even though if they really knew what the founders actually thought about race, they'd probably be horrified. So it's basically racial separation as much as can be done. Now,
how would this be implemented?
Well, let me put it this way. I can tell you how I would implement it if I was dictator of the United States.
How would you implement it? How is your ideal scenario play out?
Basically, you partition the United States into completely separate countries on the basis of how people want to separate. But the thing is, this is done after basically white people have been taught to think the way that they thought all throughout history, which is as a white nationalist sort of view, where they would have where you would have basically a white only partition. And if you think this is crazy, this is what the whites in South Africa tried to do, right? They wanted to end apartheid as you know it, and basically just cut off South Africa into states for the Khoisan, states for the Bantu, for various Bantu tribes, and then a little area right around Cape Town for the whites. That's what they wanted to do. So this is not, this shouldn't be seen as a very crazy thing.
So is South Africa your practical model for implementing this?
Well, South Africa failed to do that, right?
Have there been ever any success? What's your idea of a successful racial partition plan that's gone on in the world, in history?
In history?
Yes.
It would be, I'll say this, but a lot of people are going to flip out, India, Pakistan. And the reason they're going to flip out is because the reason they're going to flip out is because there was a lot of violence on that, and that has to do with the particular circumstances with India, right? One thing to consider in the United States is about I forget, I'm saying numbers right off the top of my head. Forgive me if I get these incorrect, but about 6% of the U.S. population makes an interstate move every year. Okay, and so let's say in this partition plan, you had to move 1/3 of the population in the United States into different areas. You would only have to raise that to about 9%. You go from 6% to 9% moving every year for 11 years. So the actual total volume of movement is not very different from what it would be today. The problem is that India wasn't like that. People lived on the land and they couldn't move. Moving was very difficult. The US is much more mobile, making separation a much easier thing. But the thing is, when I want the partition of the United States, there's going to be a whole bunch of people who don't want anything to do with race. They're going to want to have a conservative state. They're going to have a liberal, progressive state that's all multiracial, and that's their prerogative. Right, but when you partition the United States, one of the partitions should be a white-only state and a black-only state, and Ast land somewhere in the Southwest. Okay, but obviously before you do that, you want to try to get a bunch of whites to say, hey, be white nationalist. Okay, because if you did it today, the white nationalist state would be very small, and they'd all basically just want to go to Conservistan or whatever.
So do you want to respond to that, Breeze, before we proceed to ask a question of you? Very quickly.
I think that pretty much. I think that pretty much is self-explanatory. I think Ryan's a white separatist and living in. It's impossible. But
so now let me ask a question to you.
Mm-hmm.
So you said that equality to a dominant group feels like tyranny. So this is an unsettling quote because it seems to be the basic explanation given to communists when they sent people to gulags. When they objected, they're like, "Well, you're a bourgeoisie, and to you, going to the gulag is just equality. So stop complaining." I mean, the idea that you can't measure injustice because against a reigning group, is that what you're saying?
So what we're seeing right now, even today, with people questioning our drug laws now, people questioning the whole conservative idea of no government helping and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The only reason this is happening is because the ill effects of that policy, which led to that line of thinking, was only experienced by minorities, people of color, if you will. Now that white people are feeling the effects of drug abuse, of three-strike laws, of things of that nature, now we want to have kind of sort of a change on those things. And I'm okay with that. Like change is good.
Is it possible for a
go ahead.
group? Is it possible for a dominant group to experience tyranny?
Sure. Sure. It's certainly possible for a dominant group to experience tyranny, but who's being tyrannical?
How would you know whether that tyranny is real or not, based on your previous quote, I suppose?
Well, you would have to evaluate the evidence, at least in the United States, and pretty much Western Europe. I don't know too much about Eastern Europe. I didn't really look into that. But as far as the Western Europe and the United States is concerned, yeah. I'm sorry?
Hold on, Brian. I'll give you a chance to respond after my series of questions, just like I did for Breeze. Do you expect whites to feel like they're being tyrannized when the equality you want is implemented?
Well, it's not the equality I want. It's equality in general. It's not about.
But do you expect whites to feel tyrannized when?
I definitely expect that some white people will be upset that gains are being made by those who traditionally haven't had the power to make gains. Absolutely.
And it will feel like tyranny to them.
And it will feel like tyranny to them. That's what it's what I've been told. It's basically what Ryan believes, which is why he wants a separate state.
One more question before I get a response from Ryan. It seemed to me in your opening that you were defending the status quo or the status quo trajectory that we're on. Is that a fair characterization of your views?
Not defending the status quo, more or less saying stay the course. So there is a status quo, and I'm happy with the policy that we've had come out the last 50 years, but we need more. We need even more. So it's not in the sense of, hey, like things are fine right now, we don't need to do anything else, but like more along the lines of like, let's stay this course and continue to develop policy and enact policy that will enable a more free and equal United States for all people.
Okay, so Ryan, do you want to respond to that last line since in the form?
I don't know about that last line. I don't know.
No, just the entire series of questions.
Yeah, okay. Well, the first thing I would say is that fewer whites and blacks are being put into prison for the drug war than they were in the 1990s. So that's actually going down. Blacks being concerned about the gains of other groups, I don't think it's that. I think it's actually the decline in real purchasing power for everyone, right? Blacks, Hispanics, and whites for the past something like 20 years. Okay, and of course the lack of labor force participation rate for all groups. I think that has more to do with it than whatever relative gains blacks are making. And moreover, the fact is that the wealth gap between the races has actually increased. All right, so and the income gap, like a lot of people think that the income gap shrunk. The reality is that when you control for, like people thought the black-white income gap narrowed. What actually happened was that the South, largely thanks to air conditioning, caught up with the rest of the United States. right? And blacks started moving out of the South into the more wealthier North. All right,
I can't let that go. Go ahead, finish, but I can't let what you said go. You had another inaccuracy. Specifically,
okay, what was the inaccuracy?
Blacks being concerned about the gains of other groups. No, we aren't concerned about the gains of any other group. We're only concerned about what happens to us and what happens to other people like us. It's not about, we don't care whether white people make more money or white people have or white people have more material things. We just want what was promised to us.
Okay, what I was just I don't believe I said that, but if I said that, then that was a okay. Well, if I said that, then that was wrong, and it's weird that I said that because I never would think that. But anyway, so the narrowing of the income gap is largely a function of migration and the economic rise of the South.
Okay,
when you control things, and lastly, the trajectory that he's talking about, I don't think is actually happening when you look at reproductive rates by race and political group. In fact, if you look at conservative whites are actually out reproducing blacks, and they're very close to out reproducing native-born Hispanics. They're not foreign-born Hispanics.
So I'm gonna toss another.
So the trajectory I don't think is going to go.
Hold on, man. I'm gonna toss another question back to Breeze, and it's highly related. So you'll get a chance to engage this. So Breeze, so a number of opinion polls have come out in the last year showing that the perception of race relations in America is at an all-time low, or a low for the last few decades. Doesn't that seem to kind of contradict your idea of things sort of more or less being on the right trajectory?
Well, that depends upon who you talk to. I look at those same opinion polls again, at least in America. For instance, people think that Barack Obama has made race relations worse. Those people are mainly white and Republican. A lot of people think that he's made those.
I believe that both black and white people have been polled thinking that relationships are worse than they did 10 decades ago, from the polls I've seen.
Did they poll? They polled black people 100 years ago on what they thought race relations were.
10 years ago, not 100 years ago.
No, 10 years ago. I thought you said 10 decades ago. I was like, okay. Yeah, I mean, those are just people's opinions. I mean, those are surveys with what they do, 1,800 people, maybe 2,000 people. That's usually what Pew does. It doesn't matter how people feel. It matters what's happening. For instance, people felt that the economy was worse from 2008 than now, but we all know that's not true. So what do we have? What we have is people's perceptions and people's feelings versus what's actually happening. I'm not sure whether people in a poll or a survey saying race relations are worse means that race relations are worse. In other words.
Ryan, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah. Well, first thing I want to say, I finally looked up the exit polls on CNN and found that black men actually voted for Trump at 13%. So, and I'll have a link to that. But what you say about thinking the economy was getting better, even though the perception was not the case, that's not true in terms of the labor force participation rate, which is basically what the unemployment rate should be. So
the labor force participation rate is one metric. It's at the average of what it has been post World War II, and it's normally indicative of any country that introduces socialized medicine. I don't know why conservatives focus on that. It's ridiculous.
Well, sure, conservatives are focused on that, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It's been going.
Oh, I didn't think it was wrong. I just wonder why they focus on it.
It's been going down since the middle of George Bush's presidency. I don't blame Barack Obama for. I mean, the thing is, it went down a lot while Barack Obama was president. But I just want to point out that I'm not blaming Barack Obama.
I don't care. I'm not concerned with who you blame. The idea that somehow labor force participation means the economy is terrible is absurd.
Well, that's one metric by which people feel, because they don't get a job or they're getting part-time jobs and stuff like that. That's
bottom line is 2007, 2008, we had negative job growth and negative GDP. Now we don't. We've had nothing but positive job growth and positive GDP. I was sitting on the floor when the market hit 5,700 and they stopped short selling. Now it's at 20 grand. Like I remember when consumer confidence was in like the low 20s. Now it's almost at 100. I don't understand what we're arguing about as far as the economy is concerned.
We're arguing about perception versus reality. And the thing is, I'm pointing to a measure by which that really affects real people.
Okay, I'm muting you. Okay, look, you have to let the moderator speak when he's trying to make a point of order. Now, are you guys saying that the economy is? It seems to me that there's very likely that the economy makes more difference than to people's happiness than, say, race relations. Ryan, if you could unmute yourself and point out what you think the answer to that is.
Well, first off, I'm not sure about that. I haven't compared. Like that's an empirical question, and that's maybe something that that I should look into. Which matters more, variation in the economy or variation in racial diversity in terms of happiness? But also, there's a confounder in that racial diversity is going to impact the economy. Okay, so you could say, for example, Latin American countries, typically have a per capita GDP around 12,000. European countries around 3,500. Okay, and so. Yeah, they're going to be a little bit. They're going to be less happy caused by a worse economy, but that worse economy is going to be a function of the kinds of people that are defining the laws and stuff. So they go together.
But they go together, but not to push back yet again. But a partition might devastate the economy. Wouldn't people be left? I take, as a moderator, I have to be probabilistic in all my assertions.
I understand. Yeah, I understand. You're doing a fantastic job also.
Seriously, hold on. Let me ask the question before you guys answer it. A partition like you're proposing might have a huge, first of all, it would involve the dissolvement of the Constitution of the United States. It also would it would likely facilitate a huge market collapse.
Maybe.
Would that detract from people's happiness is an incredible amount, and would that be something that you would have to consider based on your plan?
Well, look, I mean, when people first make a move, they're actually less happy for the first year or so. But look, I mean, if you want to say like a partition would cause a market crash, the partition between Czech Republic and Slovakia did not cause a market crash. Okay, the partition between South Sudan and Sudan, there were major problems that came prior to that separation, but the separation itself did not cause problems. Okay, and what we're talking about with the United States is we're talking about a partition that is done after there has sort of been a direction of people moving into areas that are going to become the new countries in the first place. So you're not dealing with a partition and then you move people after the fact, as happened in India, right? So but here's another thing.
This might be too big of a question.
When I talk about I believe it is, and see, this is why I didn't want to come in here talking about policy, because because if I want to talk about the actual policy proposal, that itself is a huge topic, which I'm going to have to go into a whole bunch of stuff about, which is why I wanted to limit. Why I wanted to limit to the priors. I want to talk about the priors that go into policy, and then we can talk about the policy. That's why I wanted to do that.
Okay. Well, okay. So let's just say that the question is too big to answer in the context of a limited time debate. But since I asked you a hard question, I'm going to try to now ask Breeze a hard question. And here I actually am going to introduce my own evidence, because I've personally read this evidence before. So, Breeze, we've had a lot of studies from peer review that have shown that when people are in diverse communities, they tend to be less happy, less socially engaged, less participating in government, and less happy overall. How do you react to these studies? Do you think that this is something that is you should consider perhaps limiting the amount of diversity? Does this challenge your idea that diverse societies are better, or that racial integration is a good goal overall?
No, I don't think so. Because again, the idea being that it's not about the idea that we must live in a diverse community, we must live in a diverse society, blacks and whites must live together. It's the idea that people shouldn't be discriminated against based upon race, religion, sexual orientation. I know we're getting outside of the realm of the question. But it's the idea that people have the opportunity to do so. For instance, I went to a private school. Like, I would not have had the ability to go to a private school 50 years ago because they would not have accepted me based upon my race. It did not matter my test scores. It did not matter what my aptitude was. I would have been rejected because I wasn't one of their kind. I was able to go to a good college. I was able to go to an Ivy League university. I would not have been able to do so 50, 100 years ago. It would have been a lot harder for me to do so based upon just my background. So it's not like whereas I had classmates, Black kids who had the same test score, same SAT score, same GPA, who chose to go to HBCUs. They got accepted into, Harvard and Princeton, and chose to go to Howard or Morehouse. Diversity is not about forced integration. It's about choice. So if people are unhappy,
diversity makes people more. First of all, we have policies that are in place to encourage diversity in communities. If diversity makes people more unhappy, wouldn't those policies be bad?
Well, it depends upon what does it mean that people are unhappy? Are they sad that they're living next to people of a different race, or are they unhappy because their wife doesn't talk to them like they used to?
These are statistical measurements where we know that populations in diverse communities tend to be not only less happy, but less engaged socially with their neighbors. So everyone becomes sort of like a giant social turtle when that happens. And is that a price you're willing to pay for diversity? That's, I think, a pertinent question.
Well, it's not a price that we necessarily have to pay, right? Because people have the freedom of movement, they have the freedom of association, no? So.
But would you recommend diversity for a community, knowing that those were the consequences of diversity?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's just like civil rights. People were unhappy that there were civil rights that were going to be enacted that weren't before. To the point where we had a presidential candidate who was basically whose platform was against it. Okay, but I think looking back 50, 60 years from now, 50, 60 years later, we're like, yeah, civil rights are probably a good thing, even though at that time people were extremely unhappy about it.
We got the question. So at this point, I'm done with my questions. And the reason why I'm not letting Ryan reply to this question is I have a number of questions from the audience, and one of them directly relates to Breeze's reply. So instead of letting Ryan reply to that, I'm just going to ask him the first one of the audience questions. Now, audience, I've modified these questions to make them a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more what I think might get a good response. So forgive me if they deviate from your question a little bit. Okay, so the first question from the chat is diversity a good in itself? Is it something, like Breeze just said, that you would actually say, okay, our community is going to have more hardship, but we're going to have diversity anyway? Or is it good? Is it bad? Is it neutral? So I guess, Ryan, can you answer that? Is diversity morally good, morally bad, neutral? Is it a good in and of itself?
Well, diversity is more, I don't like to get involved with morality. I don't like to go to the land of the Izot Gap. The land of Izot is a terrible place. So I don't really have an answer to the question. I guess if you really put a gun to my head, I would say morally neutral. Okay. But regarding people, and, Quicey was talking about the right of free association. The problem, though, is that, first off, the economic reality of peoples is that they can't easily move from one place to another, depending on their job. About 6% of the U.S. population moves every year, but not at any particular given time, and not any particular person.
Moreover, I had to make a clarification. I had to make a clarification, Ryan. Before you start citing statistics, this was a moral question. It was not a statistical one. Do you morally consider diversity to be something that is good in itself, or is it neutral, or is it morally bad?
I don't care. It morally, whatever. People can think whatever they want about it.
So I think maybe the answer to the question is simple, that I think Breeze considers diversity to be good in and of itself, even if additional hardships are created by it, whereas you just don't care and you think it's neutral.
Moderator, my only problem is I don't like to equate unhappiness with hardship.
So Ryan, so I think I got your position, Breeze, but can I just grill Ryan a little bit more?
Sure.
So if I understand your position, Ryan, you would say I will accept diversity or reject it insofar as it leads to good things that I want in other dimensions. Say more achievement, better standard of living, more human happiness. Is that correct?
Correct. But here's another thing that I personally value. Now I don't say this is an objective value, but I value people being able to go the way in which they want to go, and that includes
You value
choosing.
liberty.
And that includes choosing things that I know will make them unhappy, right? If there are people who want to go live in a diverse society, even though I know it's going to make them unhappy, I support them doing so. So I have a value for liberty, qua liberty.
Okay, so not diverse. Diversity is neutral, but you do have one of liberty. Excellent. I think we answered that question. So first chat question down. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna leave the real zinger for last. This is a minor one, so I don't think we'll spend much time on this. Is people of color a legitimate categorization, either biologically or culturally? I'm gonna start with you, Breeze, since I started with Ryan on the last one.
Well, in the terms of the vernacular we use, absolutely. I mean, the term white people obviously isn't correct, right? People aren't opaque, like it's not like you're.
Do people of
so
color,
in terms
white people? So let me clarify this. I think when people say white people, they mean Europeans. They don't refer to North Asians with white skin. They don't refer to African albinos. They're referring specifically to people of European cultural, ethnic, and racial identity.
So now, then people of color would be everyone else.
People of color would be everyone else. But are there any common characteristics to that designation? It seems to be the
common. I think the thing that links them is that they're not of European ancestry.
Okay, so it's purely negative, is what you're saying.
Negative as far as
it's contentless. If I say someone's a person of color, I've said almost nothing about them, other than that they're not European.
Well, as much as saying that a white person is saying somebody is white has content because they're European.
Well, people who are white come from a specific ethnic and cultural background. Now, it's a very, very broad category, but I still have some idea of their relative place that they're from in the world, and I still have some idea of their cultural background. And so I can make and
people of color is the antithesis of that, right? If white people are people from, like you said, and it's very broad, European ancestry, you have some idea of what part of the world that they come from. Then people of color are it's the antithetical. It's the opposite. Not necessarily the opposite, but they're people who aren't from that place, who don't have that ancestry.
Okay, excellent. Ryan, do you want to just respond to this really quickly? I don't think this is a really deep question, just a formality.
No, I don't.
Yeah. Okay, I think we covered that one, and I think we're coming to the end of our time. I'm not seeing any questions that are really very different. We'll open this up afterwards. You can actually come into the chat and ask them this if they stay. They don't have to.
Yeah, I feel really bad.
My last question.
I have a bunch of. Go ahead.
Oh well, we'll have free form after this debate, so don't worry about it. So my last question from the chat, I think, before we go into closing statements and free form, is this, and I think this is a really important question. I want to see how each of you answers it. I'm going to give you as much time as possible to answer it. Does a nation have a right to make laws to maintain the majority and cultural dominance of its indigenous population? Ryan, do you want to answer that first? And we'll have a back and forth.
Okay, sure, I'll answer it first. And the answer is yes. So there you go.
Okay, how about Breeze? Do you have a question? Does a country have the right to pass laws and foreign policy to maintain the dominance and identity of its indigenous population?
As long as those laws are within the constructs of their founding documents and those ideals, sure, why not? A nation can make any laws that it wants to.
Okay, so European countries could morally essentially pass laws to ensure that they will always be white, ethnically European countries.
They can. I mean, laws. I don't think any of us has the power or even wants the power to tell countries what laws they can or cannot pass, but it's going to be up to the people, right?
No. I'm thinking morally here. And I know
morally. You're saying morally?
Ryan does not like moral questions. But for instance, if Europe said we're going to start euthanizing people with low IQs, I would say, well,
that's immoral.
Okay,
it's immoral.
That's immoral. That is a different question.
That's immoral.
Ryan, would you change your answer? Do you think it's immoral for a country to make laws to preserve its dominant? Ryan?
Hello. Yes. Can you hear me?
So that would change your answer? You think it's immoral for a country to pass laws?
No, I think it's immoral for a country to have forced euthanization.
Okay, great. But you think it's moral for them to create laws to preserve the dominance of their indigenous population, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Breeze, do you believe that it's moral for a country to pass laws to ensure the statistical dominance, the demographic dominance, and identity of their country as distinctly their indigenous culture?
Do I think it's moral?
Yes.
No. Do I think they have the right to? Yes.
Why is it immoral?
Why is it immoral? Because we're built on, I think countries should not base their kind of population.
For instance, for instance, if for instance, if Native Americans, say, wanted to pass a law that said white people can't come into our land, that would be immoral for them to do?
That would be immoral of them to do. They wouldn't even think that way. They would never think that way. That would be immoral of them to do. This is kind of like what's happening with Haiti and the Dominican Republic now, right? They're trying to keep the Haitian population down, force euthanization, even kind of a passive, like, not necessarily genocide, but they're killing people. The thing is, like, it's really a tough question. Like you said it was a zinger, and it really is. Morally, it's tough. Like, morally, you can't be like, so let's say we want a threshold of, let's say we want to keep America, we want America to be 70% white, 10% Asian, 10% black, 10% Latino. If those numbers get out of proportion, like, what laws would be passed? Are we talking about killing people? Are we talking about reclassifying people?
Like, not letting people into your country, for instance.
So this is more of an immigration question.
Or passing laws that would encourage certain ethnicities to leave your country.
Right, paying them to leave.
That would also be similar. Would that be immoral to do?
Yes, I would probably say it would be immoral.
So to clarify, that would mean that if there was a group of Native Americans who had their Native American nation, and all of a sudden white settlers showed up, it would be immoral for them to say, no, you can't settle on our land.
Yes.
Okay, so they would have to let the settlers in.
Not necessarily have to. They can, they can negotiate, they can go to war, whatever, but it's immoral to say you can't be here because you're white. That's definitely something I wouldn't prescribe to.
Okay, that's an interesting position, but it's certainly clear, I would say. Mm-hmm. So with that, I think we can head into our.
I would like to talk about regarding the Native Americans. One thing I want to say is that the Native Americans certainly had a right to a land area. The problem is, and this is based on new data. This is based on molecular genetic bottleneck data. This is like. And I'll argue about this. The population.
I need to have a clarification here, Ryan. This was not an actual historical question. This was a moral hypothetical.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I believe the Native Americans are entitled to land, but not the whole North American continent. Basically, it's like when you pee in the ocean, do you own the ocean? It's that sort of thing. So.
Understood. That's a good clarification, and I appreciate the historical clarification. But I think that our difference on that point is very clear. Okay, so with that, I think we can just take 5 minutes to wrap up. I mean, the time you guys have left on the clock is like 19 seconds. So, it's not like there's a big difference. Not there's like a big difference between. So, who wants to go first? So wait, since Ryan went first, I think that
you want primacy and recency. You want him to go last?
I think that he should. Let's do it in reverse. Let's have Killing the Breeze go first, and then you go last.
Sure. In regards to the question, what Western society should do dealing with race and racial inequality.
Just take 5 minutes to sum it up. We'll let you have 5 minutes, and then after that, the debate is officially over, and the chat goes out to everybody. And anybody in the chat can come in and discuss things, or the first 10 people to click on it. That is.
Yeah. The actual debate question itself, I mean, it's twofold. As far as what Western society should do about race, there needs to be more education about what race is, the history, the definition of it, and from there we'd be able to move forward as far as what we should do about quote unquote race, if anything at all. As far as racial inequality is concerned, yeah, that's clear. That's a policy question. And the answer is to continue to do what we're doing, but to not stop, not to go backwards, not to, or even stay the same. So we're talking about immigration laws that warrant people to come here the quote unquote right way, or to be in this country the quote unquote right way. We're talking about laws that are going to be stricter and punitive when it comes to discrimination in banking, education, law, government, etc. We're talking about the makeup of the power structure itself. We got 95% of lawyers and judges are white. We got 95 white males, I should say. We got 95% of politicians that are white males. So what we're talking about is getting inroads in, getting access into these levers of power for people who have traditionally not had access to them. So I don't even know if I need 5 minutes. I think I pretty much stated where I'm coming from. But the idea is that we keep moving forward. We keep going along with liberal progressive ideals that are going to make those who have traditionally had power or traditionally expected that they were going to be successful just because of their race, it's going to make them uncomfortable. I think one of the most telling things, and we didn't really talk about the election, was this idea of globalism and the fact that a lot of people remained within the majority, but there were even some minorities who felt this way. They didn't want to compete with people from overseas. They didn't want to compete with people from different countries or different races or different backgrounds. These are the bumps in the road that are going to be uncomfortable. Like Ryan said, like when moves are first made, people are generally unhappy. These are the moves that we're making in the 21st century to deal with racial inequality. And there are going to be some people that are going to be unhappy. And those people are going to have a powerful voice because they're the people that have traditionally been in the majority. The idea is to keep pushing forward, to keep moving along. We fought a civil war to end an atrocity, which was slavery. We had a powerful social justice movement that lasted 100 years to get rid of the next atrocity, which would be apartheid. So we're 50 years post, 350 some odd years of an institution that was built based upon racism. So it's going to take longer than 50 years to get rid of that. And there are going to be bumps in the road, and there are going to be hiccups, and that's okay. That's to be expected. I think the moderator asked an excellent question. Do I expect there to be an idea of tyranny as far as like the majority is concerned? I'm sure there are people who are part of the majority right now, absolutely, who feel like this is tyranny. Why am I competing with that black guy? Why am I competing with that woman? Why am I competing with that immigrant? That's the world that we live in now, and it will be for the better. Progress doesn't really stop. It can be halted, but we can't really retard it. We can't really take it away. And so it's going to be a matter of how much it can be slowed and how much it can be accelerated over the 21st century.
Okay. Is that it?
That's it.
Great. Now, Ryan, do you want to take 5 minutes to summarize your case?
Sure. In 1790, the United States passed the first Citizenship Act, which limited citizenship to free white persons that are of good character. There is no pathway for any person of African or Native American ancestry to become a citizen. Every state in the Union with a non-negligible Negro population had laws against race mixing. Whether Lincoln believed it or not, he had to say during the campaign, quote, "I am not nor ever have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say, in addition to this, that there is a physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will ever forbid the two races from living together on the terms of social and political equality." Stephen Douglas, his opponent, said, quote, "For one, I'm opposed to Negro citizenship in any form. I believe that this government is made on the white basis. I believe that it was made by white men for the benefit of white men and their posterity forever. I am in favor of confirming the citizenship to white men, men of European birth and European descent, instead of conferring it upon Negroes and Indians." This was the norm globally. Winston Churchill led a campaign following World War II against non-white immigration to Britain, saying, "Keep Britain white." In the United States, as late as 1914, the Supreme Court ruled that states could deny citizenship to Asians. And in 1910, the Socialist Party Congress agreed on the unconditional exclusion of Chinese and Japanese on the grounds that the U.S. had enough problems with blacks. Calvin Coolidge in 1921 said that, quote, "There are racial considerations too grave to be brushed aside for any sentimental reasons. Biological laws tell us that certain divergent people will not mix or blend. Quality of mind and body suggests that observance of ethnic law is as great a necessity to a nation as immigration law." Harry Truman said, "I'm strongly of the opinion that Negroes ought to be in Africa, yellow men in Asia, and white men in Europe and America." And there's so much more. The state of Oregon had in its constitution that it was to be a white-only state. This is the norm for the West, always identified as being a racial identity, not merely geography. And this policy of white nationalism with protectionism, interventionist industrial policy, and legal enforcement of the nuclear family unit is what worked. It's what built the world we know today. White nationalism is bar none the most tried, tested, and proven policy idea. It's what pulled the world from the subsistence Malthusian level that humans had been at from the year 1000 BC to 1500 AD. And this racial feeling is normal. Clowns who call for individualism and post-racial sentimentalism, first off, have to square this with the fact that the program of racial integration has a 100% failure rate, but also with the fact that nobody else on the planet feels this way. Everyone else is a black nationalist, Arab nationalist, Hindu nationalist, or Amerindian nationalist by any other name. And nobody is getting up in their faces. In fact, there's a whole industry to justify other race nationalism, playing into perceived grievances against whites, who are the ones responsible for modern life as we know it. When a company makes a product like shampoo, makeup, or soap, they have to test it first, make sure it's safe. The burden of proof is on them to show that their product is safe. But with this multiracialist program of replacement level immigration and racial integration, they never proved that it could work on a small scale before just making it policy throughout the West. It was never tested. The kind of basic testing required for a shampoo product wasn't required for the largest deviation from the tried and proven racial policy of white nationalism that was the norm for most of the history of what we call the West. After 50 plus years of uninterrupted failure, it's time to stop worshiping this idea and stop seeing brown people as the noble oppressed going through some sacred tribulation, and see that they only seek to replace European civilization with their own, which is totally understandable. Okay, this is something they don't consider. All right, the West is white people. It is what pulled the world out of the Malthusian rut and serfdom and slavery, and that the world had languished in for all millennia prior. Okay, anything immoral that we did is only now considered immoral because of the values that white people made universal. Ideas like self-determination and ending slavery worldwide, as Russia, Britain, and France did, the global ban on slavery. We have nothing to feel guilt over. We have nothing to apologize for, and everything to be proud of.
All right, thank you very much. And with that, this concludes the formal portion of our debate. You gentlemen are free to leave, but I'm going to be opening up the floor to our listeners now by tweeting out the link to the participation. Now, we've got about 200 people watching, so I assume that this is going to go pretty fast, but we'll just see who comes in. And okay, hold on. Before I send this link out, I am heavily moderating this. So I maintain the ability to mute anybody, including the two participants. Now, it's your responsibility to unmute yourself after I mute you if you speak out of order. So
Gotcha.
Deal with that, okay? So here goes. Here's the link, guys. I can resend it whenever you guys are ready. So, well, good job, guys. Thank you for showing up.
Really enjoyed it.
We can have a free conversation about any points you want. People will probably start coming in now. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, people are joining the call.
Yeah, so again, I'm the moderator. I will mute people who speak at a turn. If you want to talk, if you want to make a point, put a text in the chat and I will come to you. Otherwise, if you speak at a turn, I will mute you. Okay, So the first person I'm seeing who has a point is Fritz. Fritz, go ahead.
Okay, here's my question. Ryan, are you aware that there was never any miscegenation laws in any European country? There was no miscegenation laws in Britain.
How many, for example, how many blacks were there in Britain during, say, the 1800s?
That's not the point.
They're probably a bunch of Indians. They're probably a bunch of Indians and
Okay,
a bunch of
let
other
me
people.
let me put it this way. Excuse me,
Guys.
Okay.
Hold on, guys. Before a point of moderation, there's gonna be 10 people in the chat. You guys have. It's very, very hard if everyone pipes in. We're gonna have a bunch of card crashes. So the person who asked the question and the person who is answering it only, please. Otherwise, text me and I'll get to you. Okay.
Right. So
go ahead. So Ryan, you had
yeah. Okay. You could say the same thing about the state of Maine. Okay, Maine didn't have any anti-miscegenation laws because they didn't have racial diversity during that time period, right? So when you're talking about Britain, you're talking about a country that has the racial demographics, or at least at the time had racial demographics of the state of Maine. So, I mean, yeah, they didn't do it because I believe at its height there were about 10,000 black people in Britain.
I think the numbers I heard was about 20,000 in London. But that's about it. Around 1800.
Well, okay.
But I think my wider point is that, my wider point on this is that there's never actually been a sense of white unity. This is a very, very recent thing. Europeans have seldom been united outside of absolute use of force under the Roman Empire or the European Union. Europeans, as every other race have done, have a history of murdering and killing each other just as far more than ever being unified.
Yeah. Well, I would point to the experience of the United States, where you had all these people who said, "I'm
We're not
Irish.
the only country in the world."
I'm Irish.
Fritz, let him answer the question.
Okay.
I'm Irish. I'm Italian, and so you had all these people with all these ideas about what ethnicity there were. And today, of course, that's gone. Like nobody cares. Nobody cares about. Maybe they care. Maybe they'll look at the genealogy. Oh, look, I have some Irish in me or whatever. But it's not a real thing because those things burn off. Okay. So, but the thing about, pan-white unity, obviously, yeah, sure. That is something that has come about recently. I mean, similarly, in the Balkans, right? When the Ottomans were a big threat, all those Balkan states banded together, identifying themselves as, Eastern Orthodox Christians against the Muslim
Albanians.
Not the Albanians. They're Muslim. The Albanians are Muslim.
Okay. Well, actually, are you aware that they frequently? Well, then what
yes.
What about their oppression at the end?
When the Ottomans
let him answer the question.
When the Ottomans were driven out, yes, they were back at each other's throats. But regarding Europe, we're looking at a different situation.
All right, and here's the thing. Actually, in addition, you do realize they also had immense hatred towards the Austrians as well.
Sure, because
the Austrians
because the Habsburg. Okay,
let him answer the question. Don't interrupt.
What do you like?
Question interrupt. Go ahead.
Do you think I'm unaware of everything is race? Is that what you think that I'm thinking? Look, in this debate, all I'm talking about is race because we're talking about race in the West. Okay, but obviously there's a whole bunch of other factors going on. All right, there's a whole bunch of all sorts of reasons why people can hate each other. I'm not a complete racial reductionist, but it's just one of the tools used to explain the world historically, and of course going forward, it is of primary importance given the kind of crazy ideas that white people have about race today, changing from what they had throughout all of their history, sometime in the mid 1950s.
Yes, that's
any other questions from people in the chat? We have a lot of people here.
Sure.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Anarcho.
My question is to Fringe or Ryan, excuse me. What after we were to say create this sort of white nation state, would it be possible for people within that sort of subcategories, like let's say, could the blondes of Sweden say we want an ethno state of our own that only allows for blonde-haired, blue-eyed phenotypes to exist, and then redheads and the Irish and Icelandic could do the same thing?
I'd have no problem with that. I mean, look, you're all I can say is if King Ryan is king of this area, I would have no problem with that. That's all I can say. I mean, I can't tell you what is going to happen in the future. That's something.
Okay, Nero, I have a question from you. Do you want to take the floor? You'll have to unmute yourself, though. Okay, well, he unmutes himself. Fritz, do you have another question?
Yeah, this is another one. Are you aware, Ryan, that in the 1920s, Jews had an average IQ of about 75?
I think that's incorrect. I mean, I've heard that, and I think you're talking about supposed IQ tests administered at Ellis Island.
In the 1920s, Jews had an average IQ of about 75.
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true.
Okay. All right. You don't think it's true. All right.
So how about we go to Jolly Crocodile and have him ask? You can unmute yourself, though.
All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I had a question really for both Ryan and the other guy. Sorry, I didn't catch your name. If you think the racial situation, do you think it's going to get worse? Do you think there's going to be more tensions in both the United States and Europe? And how bad do you think it'll get if it continues to get worse?
Well, I mean, I guess I'm of the belief that it's not getting worse. It's only getting better. What we're seeing is kind of a backlash from people who are realizing that my position as quote unquote the top dog is now being in question. So I think that there's possibility, that you will see backlash. You will see, separatist movements and stuff like that. But if you look throughout history, that's happened throughout time. And then as Ryan himself pointed out, that stuff just peels off. It really does just peel off. There are events that happen. There are really kind of sort of, for lack of a better term, whether it's 9/11 or the civil rights movement, there's always something that happens that quote unquote unites us. I hate that term, but people use it all the time. So while you had Italians and Irish, being treated just as badly as black people, I feel like the largest lynching in at least the U.S. was of 33 Italians. Once the civil rights movement came along, this whole idea of whiteness became more inclusive to Southern and Eastern Europeans where it wasn't before. Whereas today you're going to have a situation where, people are feeling threatened about what's being taken and what's being lost, but there's usually some sort of seminal event or some sort of kind of idea that comes along that kind of sort of changes that.
Thank you very much. That answered the question. Blackjack, do you have a question?
The question was to bonus.
No. Blackjack, do you have a question?
Yes, I did. I had a question. I had two questions, but I guess I'll just ask one of them. It was to Ryan. Do you think that religion should be segregated as well as race because they're both?
As much as no, I support people segregating on whatever basis they feel they want to segregate. So if they want to segregate religiously, then that's fine. If they want.
I'll ask a question here, Ryan. What happens if people don't want to partition themselves into these ethno-states?
First off, one of the partitions would be, the thing is, in order to get the partition going, the first thing you need to do is find a way to gain political power. So
no. Yeah. I'm saying like you just told me that Seattle is like going to be Native American, and I'm like, I just bought a house here. Screw you. Like, I just like Seattle.
No. What would happen is the government would make you an offer. What would happen is the government would make you an offer you can't refuse. That's what would happen.
So you're gonna shoot me?
Okay. Oh, come on! Don't do this. Like, okay. If you don't pay your taxes,
look, Ryan. Before we get into the indignation here. No, Ryan.
All laws are ultimately enforced by the end of the barrel of a gun.
Congratulations. Look, Ryan, you can unmute yourself, but you have to understand this: forcing people off lands is not some hypothetical reason people get shot for. This happens all the time in history. People have tried to move populations all the time, and there's always a few people who want to stick on their houses, and they get shot. So this isn't some weird thing I'm making up. It's something that's absolutely observable in history. You can respond to it now.
Yeah, well, okay, then they can. Well, one or two things. You may or not have to actually shoot them, but here's what happens.
Well, this sort of detracts from your idea of liberty being like a primary value.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, first off,
I don't think Ryan is an ANCAP anymore.
Yeah, I haven't been in ANCAP.
So I've been dominating. Go ahead. Someone has
very long.
Ryan, finish answering the question. I'm going to go somewhere.
Okay, but look, if you have somebody who's in Arizona and he says, "Well, I want to live on my land," well, that Arizona is going to be part of Aztlan, all right? And if he wants to live there, let's just say Arizona is going to be part of Aztlan, and if he wants to live there, well, he can roll the dice and see what happens to him, right? That's the reality, you know.
Okay, so Colin Porter, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question for Ryan.
Yes.
Okay, so you mentioned at the very beginning of this about the voting patterns of whites and non-whites, and about how it seemed like you think that it's almost inevitable, regardless of what the reason, whether it's genetic or cultural or what, the non-whites will vote for more socialism and more essentially like taking and redistribution, right? But they have genetic admixture studies done on Latin America and Chile, which the Heritage Foundation ranks as the freest economy in Latin America, is actually only about 50% white, which is lower than more socialist Latin American countries like Brazil, all of them. And the same thing goes for Colombia. That only is, I think, 42% white, something like that. That's the second freest economy.
Okay, well, yeah, and you can find little examples. That's why we use overall trends instead of picking individual countries. I mean, compare Latin America to Europe. Also, regarding the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom, it's very good, but I wish more organizations would do things like that. Because in terms of and Sean and I actually looked at this and looked at the criteria on the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom that actually matter in terms of economic growth. And the most important were the corporate tax, freedom of regulation, and freedom from corruption. But of course, freedom from corruption isn't a policy. I forget what we were talking about.
Okay, let's just go on to another question.
Okay, I want to respond to the thing about the Irish.
You can also
hold on 1 minute. Okay, Ryan, can you quickly respond to the Irish question? I have to move on to the next question.
The idea that Irish were treated particularly badly is not borne out in either income data, both on studies in Canada and in the United States. Moreover, the United States federal government was bringing in Irish people when they had a white-only citizenship law, showing that the United States federal government considered Irish to be white. And the racial thinkers at the time had all sorts of racial categories. None of them put Irish in a separate racial category. So both in terms of economic acceptance, government policy, and racial thinkers at the time, everyone considered Irish white.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would respond to that.
When the moderator comes in, you have to let him speak. Otherwise, we have no order. I'm sorry. So, Ben, do you have a question? And then I'll get on to Killing the Breeze.
Yes, I have two questions for Killing the Breeze.
Sure.
The first question is, what are your thoughts on Dr. Martin Luther King?
Oh, Dr. King? Well, there's two Dr. Kings, right? There's the one we learn about in school, who is the nonviolent, peaceful protester who, will make the world see what our plight is.
And then there's the white nationalist Dr. King.
Yeah, the black, well, not white nationalists, but the Communist Workers' Party by any means necessary from 66 to 68, Dr. King, who wasn't necessarily against violence, who was kind of sort of shut out of the movement by the religious power structure. That's the guy we don't learn about in school. So there's kind of a duality to him. I respect them both. I mean, anybody who's willing to get their ass beat for what they believe is probably is a good man. So whatever it is whatever it is. Like I said, I had a lot of respect for Spencer this past week and taking those punches. I don't agree with anything he says, but it shows that he's willing to take some blows. Not that it was anything close to King and what he had to deal with, or John Lewis, but when violence becomes the answer, or when you seek to do violence, there's a certain passion in it that shows that this is a cause that I believe in, whether it's righteous or not. So MLK was all right with me.
Okay, and my follow-up question.
Quick.
Did you know that Dr. King supported conversion therapy?
Sure, he's a religious dude. Yeah, he was super religious dude. Again, You're telling me that a black religious dude from the South was not down with gay people? That's not a shocker. That's definitely a real thing, and he's dead wrong about that.
Excellent. So we have a question from Nero. Nero, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, I gotta keep a little bit quiet though. This is for Ryan. Actually, no, for you first. I had to miss a large portion of the debate. Was the black family ever brought up?
I don't believe we got to it. No.
No.
Okay. Is there a question you had about the black family?
Yeah, this is for Ryan.
Yes.
Do you think that the majority of the crime caused by black people is due to the actual destruction of the black family unit?
I would say no. Now, I will tell you what, I don't do a whole lot of stuff on race and crime. If you want to talk about race and crime, you should talk to Sean about that, because he basically writes everything about race and crime. I find race and crime to be kind of boring because, for example, like, let me put it this way. You look at like murder statistics. Black people are 11 times more likely to commit murder than whites. Okay, but both numbers are really, really low. So it's like, it's not exactly who cares, but it's not really that important an issue. As for the family and crime, I think probably not, because if I recall correctly, basically there's been a period from like the 1980s to today where single parent black families have increased, but black violent crime, real crime, not drug crimes, real crime has actually declined in that period. So it's hard to say. And now the thing is, it may decline for other reasons. So the black family may be increasing, or the collapse of the black family may be increasing black criminality, but there's other factors that are overpowering it. But I don't think it's I don't think it's that important.
I mean, as assuming that I'm the lone. Go ahead.
I can't let you talk because otherwise that violates the forum. I have one question from let's see. I have a question from Colin and then Fritz. So Colin, go ask your follow-up question. If you ask it to Breeze, he'll be able to make his other response part of his answer. But go ahead.
So two things when Ryan was answering my question that he brought up was, the first thing was he talked about the necessity of looking at overall trends rather than playing games with specific examples. And I'll admit I haven't done like a correlation or anything just now. But looking at the graph in front of me, you can see that the Bahamas is also up there on the Economic Freedom Index. They're only 16% white. So is St. Lucia. So this doesn't seem to be like a one-off thing for Chile and Colombia, or two off, or 3, 4, 5 off. And the other thing I wanted to mention is you talk about how the Heritage Foundation's economic freedom metrics, only some of them matter, or some of them matter more than others. And that's all fine and dandy if you're talking about matter in terms of how well the economy does. But what you said at the beginning was not about how well the economy will do. It was about, advocation for redistribution and like things that were anti-freedom.
So what's your question?
I think there doesn't seem to be a lot of good evidence that if you look at admixture studies in Latin America, that the less white countries are going to have more government, more intervention in the economy.
Is there a question there? It's a statement.
It's a challenge.
Okay, a challenge. Okay, Ryan, do you want to respond to that really quickly?
Yeah, but again, like what you're pointing out when you point to Saint Lucia, and I think another like libertarian icon for this is the island country of Mauritius. Yeah, you're talking about little island bank states, and sure,
I mean, this is not little island things. These places have millions of people. Colombia has a lot of people, right?
No. When you're talking, okay, but that's a different thing. You're talking about Colombia and Chile. Okay.
Yeah, I also talked about the Bahamas. I also
now Bahama, that's black, right? These are sort of different categories. When you talk about, first off, you're talking about several of these sort of island bank states, and first off, that high GDP of these states is not necessarily a reflection of median income. It's a reflection of there being a lot of wealth.
Colin, we have to not get buried down so deeply in the specifics of one factual question. You can forward links to me and I can put them in the description, but I'm going to move on because otherwise we'll just be talking about these index measurements for 20 minutes. Fritz, sorry about that, but I mean, we have to be diverse. Fritz, can you ask your question to Breeze? Because he was about to come in and say something. And I'll give him a chance to make his response and also answer your question.
Yeah, my question to Breeze is, what do you think about the idea that Black conservative thinker Thomas Sowell has put forth that decades of the welfare state has actually made things far worse for the Black community than slavery or segregation ever could, because of the fact that if you actually look at the rates of fatherlessness and poverty and dependence on welfare in the Black community, decades of welfare state, the sexual revolution, and the influx of drugs have. That's the argument is that's what's destroyed the Black community. Because if you actually, Thomas Sowell will give stories when he grew up in the 40s and 50s that, growing up in Harlem, that things weren't. I mean, it wasn't the best neighborhood, but he said he would lay out on the fire escape at night on summer nights, and people would leave their doors unlocked because people didn't actually feel to let people in to watch their televisions. And so I think the idea there is that it's not racism which has done all this horrible things to the Black community in the past several decades, but it's actually the welfare state promoted by the Democratic Party, who have always, in my view, been filled with horrible racists.
Yeah, I disagree with that 100%. And I know Thomas Sowell is a legend on the right or whatever, mostly because he's Black and speaks against the Black community, but we've got to get rid of this myth of the Black family being decimated. I don't understand where this comes from. You guys are math guys. This is simple math, right? Like
statistically,
I will come in here and speak about this because there's a certain statistical reality that we have. Like 72% of children in Black community who are now being raised.
Sure, sure. That's the number that's always quoted or whatever, that are born out of wedlock or whatever.
And it was much lower in the 50s.
That's because Black women who are married are having much less children, as Ryan actually pointed out or whatever. At one point, married Black women were having more kids than married white women were. Now that's not even the case at all. Married Black women are closer to the bottom.
Are you asserting that there is no problem with Black children not knowing their fathers? That if we looked at fatherlessness,
where's this coming from? It's been shown study. Everybody should know who their parents are if they can, but Black fathers are involved with the Black families just as much as white fathers are, Asian fathers, or any other father. Studies have shown that.
Fritz, you assert there's a statistical reality that the Black fathers are as involved in their children's lives as white fathers. Okay, go ahead.
Sure.
I just wanted to clarify
my question is, I think that statement, or that study that comes from is because of the fact that it's the those are the Black fathers that are, but the fact is the majority of Black men are not, Black fathers are not involved with their child's lives.
Where is that coming from?
Look up every statistic regarding fatherlessness rates, and it was much lower back in the 50s.
But I've given you I gave you statistics on fatherlessness that showed that Black fathers were just as involved as white fathers, Asian fathers.
What statistic is that? Killing. Sorry, Breeze. What statistic did you say?
I have to go online. It was actually on the LA Times. They talked about the myth.
Have that link, please.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Again,
absolutely.
The fact it's not a myth. Okay, it's not a myth because of the fact that. Listen. Shut up.
Very quickly, Fritz. Very quickly.
That study is the fathers that are involved. Not the fact is overall, most Black children. Would you disagree with this? Most Black children do not know their father.
Yeah, survey finds data defies stereotypes about Black fatherhood. Yeah, there's all sorts of there's no this idea that like these Black families are just broken. It's like absurd. Like if you guys really want to fix it, you guys really want to.
You disagree with all the statistics pointing out otherwise.
Fritz. I know. I agree with all the statistics pointing to countering what you all are saying is true. That's all.
Guys, this
that makes sense.
Question. Guys, we have essentially pointed out the disagreement statistically. People send sources to me. I'll include them in the description. And let's get another question. Okay, I think Blackjack had a question for Breeze.
Yeah, my question is probably a simple one, but Breeze, what in your mind equates racial diversity with intellectual diversity?
Oh, I think they're one and the same. If you have people
I know you think they're the same. I'm asking you why they are the same.
Why racial diversity and intellectual diversity are the same?
Yes.
Are you saying that people from different races have the same intellect?
I'm not. I'm saying that why do you think that just because people are of different race, they would have different ideas?
Oh, because they are different backgrounds. We all have different experiences. My experience as a black male growing up in Baltimore, going to school in Philadelphia and living in Brooklyn is going to be different than yours. Where we all don't have the same exact experience. That's why I'm for racial diversity. I'm for gender diversity. The more people we have together giving their ideas and sharing their experiences, the stronger we are and the better off that we are. Because as you can see, even in this forum, and I love this forum, there's a lot of uniformity of ideas where I'm just like, wow, like I hate to go back to the black family, but you guys shouldn't be, the black family isn't in shambles. You guys need to tell more married black women to have more kids. They're getting married, and not having any kids. That's what's happening. I mean, we all know that the study just came out, which Hot Air and others tried to debunk, like black women are doing the best of any racial or gender subset in the country.
You answered the question. Now let's go to Jolly Crocodile. He has a question. Jolly Crocodile?
Okay, you can hear me, right? Yes. My question for Breeze was, if you think, everyone is gonna, I guess, eventually get along together, and all the races are, we're gonna live in a diverse utopia. How long is that gonna take? I mean, the U.S. has been diverse for, I think, 2 generations now, and black people have been here for hundreds of years. They haven't really, they haven't become a part of the mainstream. They haven't adapted. So how long is this going to take?
Black people have been here for, a couple hundred years, but it wasn't really on even footing. Like, I think we would all agree with that. So, yeah, I mean, if we want to look at Jamestown at 1605, and what are we at 19? Where were we at? I said 2017 now. That's roughly 400 years. We really didn't have the separation of what we know as violent black slavery from indentured servitude into the 1730s to 1740s. So we'll say 275 years of slavery and apartheid minus 50 years of freedom. Yeah, it could take another 100, 200 years. It could even take longer. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, the systems that have been established and built, especially in the United States, are going to take a while to topple. But I mean, look, we had a black president. No one ever thought that was going to happen. I didn't think it would happen in my lifetime. Well, my grandfather didn't think that would happen.
Okay,
well, so I mean, it wasn't. They weren't calling his white hat the N-word though. That was his black hat.
Okay, so Anarcho Rain, I think you had a question follow up, right?
I have a question for Killing the Breeze. Is it possible that we could have equality of opportunity between the races, but still not have equality of outcome between the races?
Sure, absolutely. That's actually what I focus on. The idea, all I want is the equality of opportunity. I think a lot of the things that even conservatives talk about, some of them have some merit. But the idea is you can't really address those issues within minority communities until we're treated, like citizens. Right. I mean, we're talking about things as of now in 2017, we're being denied that are basic citizenship things. But you're right. You can definitely have equality of opportunity without equality of outcome, certainly.
Okay, can I just ask one quick follow-up? Jolly Crocodile posted in the chat, how would you know which one is which? In other words,
Sure. Well, I think the idea is to look at what is being impacted by policy versus what just happens, right? Like the Supreme Court gave a test, de jure racism versus de facto racism, right? What happens as a result of laws, as opposed to what happens as a result of how people act. If it's the latter, you can't do anything about that. That's societal. If it's the former, you can address that by policy. So I think we have to look at those things on a case-by-case basis.
So I have a follow-up
to determine
question.
whether
I have a follow-up question.
This is racism.
Breeze, I have a follow-up question to that. So if you're saying that you can't do anything about de facto racism, only de jure racism, what is, do basically we have anything more to do about race in this country? Can we just ignore it at that stage? Because I'm not aware of de jure racism still existing in this country. Hello?
Did he pause?
Look, it looks like his connection dropped.
Yeah.
Oh,
Or perhaps he was stunned by your brilliant argument.
Hopefully Breeze gets to come back in, but we're kind of winding up anyway. I only have 15, 20 more minutes. Does anybody want to? I think at this stage maybe we can make it a little bit more formal. People
Informal.
a little more informal, and people want to just chat about things really briefly. Anyone have any questions for Ryan? I guess.
I'll go ahead, Ben. Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, well, I was going to say, Ryan, do you think that your ideas will ever be implemented? And if so, how far in the future do you think that might be?
It depends on what you mean by ideas being implemented. Like
the idea that you had.
I mean, if you're talking about partition, if you're talking about the partition
that's
thing,
what I mean. Partitioning.
probably never. Right.
All
My goal here is basically to get white people to stop the guilt train, stop the apology train, and recognize that the racial differences as they currently exist are probably down to genetics, that they have nothing to apologize for and all that stuff. Right? That's basically my goal, and to act politically within that framework.
I have a follow-up question, Ryan. Don't you think that the extremism of racial partitioning is something that is going to hinder you in that goal because it's so extreme that it turns people off?
Yeah, well, the thing is, that's why I didn't bring it up. Basically, the moderator asked me like what the ultimate solution would be, and I told him the ultimate solution. But the thing is, I don't like.
To clarify my position, what I asked you was the resolution of this debate, which was, what do you intend to do about race problems and race inequality in the 21st century? And that was your solution.
Okay, well, but in the more immediate term, what you can do is you can have better immigration laws, okay, and just basically getting white people to recognize that there's nothing evil about racial segregation, right? All countries are segregate from each other. Laos is segregate from Vietnam. Nigeria is segregate from Germany. Right? There's nothing magically evil about that. All right, and it's just to get And the problem is I didn't come in here preparing for a policy debate.
Well, Ryan, you really should. Anytime that the subject is political philosophy or ethics, you need to be prepared for that question. What is your solution? That's always going to be a question.
I prepared for. Okay.
Yeah, I had to clarify. The question was not, is race realism true? The question was, how do you intend to handle race problems in the 21st century?
Okay, educate whites to be white nationalists. There you go.
Okay, excellent. Right. Okay, great. So anyone have another question?
Yeah. Well, I said I was going to go right after Colin, after Ben. So I would say, Ryan, what would you say? Because essentially my positions on this, my ideal for both the United States and for European countries would be immediate freeze on mass immigration, only allowing a tiny amount of highly skilled immigration that already have jobs there, deport all criminal aliens, and sort of try and force some form of cultural assimilation and integration. Would you be okay with that?
That would be an improvement. Yeah.
I mean, I think I do generally agree that with the idea that isn't it generally called the Putnam effect, that people in diverse neighborhoods don't really get along?
Yeah, I mentioned that in the
because here's the thing: it's like I would be my position on this is that I think in my neighborhood, let's say, I would much rather have to live next to somebody like Dinesh D'Souza or Thomas Sowell than some blue-haired Norwegian feminist. But I think I can understand it if like hundreds and hundreds of Thomas Sowells or Dinesh D'Souza started moving in. I think it'd be perfectly okay to have to not be the most comfortable about that. I think people should have.
Great. So Fritz, so killing the reason is trying to get back in. Does anyone want to drop out so he can add back in?
Get rid of the Jew. I mean Ben Shapiro.
Right. Yeah.
I hear that. Revolver on the table.
Can someone drop out, please?
I got one.
If no one's gonna drop out, then I can't do anything about getting Breeze back in. But we only had 10 minutes more anyway. So, anyone else want to say anything?
I got one more thing.
I have like one more question, and I gotta go.
I hate to keep harping on this point, Ryan, but I only bring it up because you brought up economic freedom yourself. I just wanted to say that. So.
Colin, we understand the contention on the floor. It's now just a matter of looking at the statistics, and this is not the proper forum to go through pages of stats. We understand that you disagree on the statistics, right?
Well, it's not a matter of disagreement. He really hasn't countered it in any way.
Okay.
What?
Okay.
Countered what?
Well, okay. So Brazil
there exist outliers. Okay, I'm blown out. There you go. Thanks.
Yeah. Can I please ask a question to Ryan to try to?
Yeah. Go ahead. Anarcho Rain.
I'm actually going to play devil's advocate to an extent, and because some of the people who might agree with you on the data of what you're saying about race realism would say that the solution would actually be integration, to have all these races intermixed so that we eventually come to one big old gray race, and all the traits of these various races just kind of spread out, and we have no real difference between the races anymore. What do you think of that?
I'm very aware that people would think of that, because that used to be my solution. That used to be my solution to the problem of racial differences, was mass race mixing. Problem with that is that you're going to kill the West, and basically the exceptionalism of European countries is going to be brought down sort of to a Latin American level, sort of that mixed race, 90 IQ sort of thing. And that is not ideal. So that's sort of,
Okay,
I'm back now.
Hello.
Yeah. Hello.
Jolly, are you going?
Okay. Ryan, I don't really have any questions or anything, just some general thoughts. About your I guess performance in the debate. I'm a white nationalist, so I'm on your side. But I think you cucked too much in going on the defensive. You need to don't let the left have the moral high ground. You went way too much on the defensive when Breeze was.
Can you make an actual argument? We can do debate strategy with the various sides, like when you're not in front of an audience.
Okay, well, I'm just saying.
This isn't a strategy session for alt-right. This is debate still.
Deplatform the alt-right.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm just saying, don't cuck like that. But the other thing with the white nationalism, if it's going to come, do you think it has to come? Because I think white nationalism has to come sometime within at least this or the next generation. I don't think it's going to work if it comes later. Like, I think America and probably Europe too is going to be too far gone if it doesn't come in the next 20 to 40 years.
I'm back, by the way.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, well, and I'm going to have to leave.
Yeah.
Right.
We only have 10 more minutes, guys, so let's keep it short, okay?
So I don't think so, because I think actually the political trends in the United States, as long as the Republican Party seals the border, the political trends favor the Republican Party in terms of reproduction. Yes, the white population is going down, but the conservative white population is outbreeding everybody, including native-born Hispanics. So now, yes,
are going to take us all.
So yes, there's going to be a white minority in the United States, but there's going to be a Republican majority, and ironically, the effectiveness of white politics is probably going to increase in the United States for quite a while. So I don't know exactly the timeline. I don't think we can have a crystal ball about that. But also, whites don't have to be a majority to have a partition, right? As long as you have other racial groups that are, there's a lot of Hispanics that support Aztlan or annexation back to Mexico. They can form part of a coalition of pan-separatism, right? It doesn't have to be just whites that do this.
I think you answered the question well. So, anyone else have a question?
Yeah, you do know that not all Hispanics are actually non-white, right?
Yeah, I know.
Actually, this is a criticism.
Argentina.
I know that, but this is general criticism that I have against both the alt-right and the progressives. I mean, the idea that these Hispanics, these poor oppressed brown people, is not true at all, because there's plenty of white people in Mexico.
Yeah.
Okay,
including the presidential family.
Yeah.
I have a question for Breeze.
Sure.
Okay.
Guys,
so-
I have to go right now.
Okay, thank you very
All
much
right.
for participating.
Thank you, Ryan.
This was a miracle.
Okay, can I ask a question to Breeze?
Wrapping this up
Sure.
here.
I was asking a question. Okay.
Oh, you go.
Sorry. Breeze. Okay, so Ryan thinks that blacks have low IQ and that they're inferior and that they should be all killed, right? But have you considered, like, do you think it's a valid counter argument to make against him that because blacks actually were pharaohs and built the pyramids, that they would actually, like, they probably have the higher IQ?
I mean, measuring IQ that's not, I mean, IQ tests are generally flawed. I'm not really concerned about who's smarter than who or whatever. I'm more or less
Unless you end
concerned
up having
about
a
what's
high
guaranteed.
Brain correlation directly correlated with IQ.
Well, I mean, IQ tests were only meant for children, right? And adults have taken IQ and like it kind of gone crazy with it. It's like my IQ's higher than yours. It's like this is a test for kids. But yeah, I mean, I will say that black people have a rich history worldwide, and
Egyptians weren't black though.
Well, they
well,
were.
I mean, they were black people though. Well, Egypt.
No,
I mean,
actually, no. Look at the ancient.
He's totally right about Egyptians being black.
No. If you actually look at Egyptian depictions, there's a clear distinction between how Egyptians depicted themselves and how they depicted the Nubians. And they depicted the Egyptians would have been depicted as bronze-skinned and the Nubians as black-skinned. So
well, I mean, again, that's Middle Eastern. Those are the Middle East in general. But I mean, to say that Egyptians weren't black people, how about this? Egyptians were people of color. Does that make it? Is that better?
We agreed that
I'll call them colored people. How about I'll call them colored people? How do you like that?
We agreed that you meaningless.
You can call them whatever you want to. It doesn't hurt me.
You can say that the Egyptians and the Nubians were different from each other, and that's fine, but you also still have the same similar divide between even African Americans today. You have light-skinned niggas and dark-skinned niggas, right? So I think that the Egyptians and the Nubians were probably like that.
Well, yeah. Actually, I imagine
the Nubians were dark-skinned niggas.
This is the problem with the
let's stop interrupting each other. So we only have 5 more minutes, so I want this more to our question and answer like we had previously, unless like everyone talking over each other like just started happening.
Yeah, or
last 5 minutes. We probably have questions.
I do have a question.
No, I have a question as well.
Okay, so sorry, who is that? Was that Nero? Go ask your question
first.
Yeah, that was me. This is for both Ryan and you, Breeze, but because Ryan left, it's just for you, Breeze. You said that the black community hasn't really been affected by fathers not really being in there. Well, I have a statistic from the Census Bureau from 2014.
Well, go ahead, finish your thing, but that's not what I said. I said the black family hasn't fallen apart or isn't in this state of disarray that like a lot of white people think they are in. It's pretty absurd, actually.
Nero, actually, I'm going to mute you, Nero. I'm vetoing this question. We're not relitigating a statistical question again and again and again. People can search for questions afterwards. Keep it on new, fresh questions. You can interpret guys on their side later. Okay.
All right, I had I think it was
Fritz, yes.
Yeah. All right, so if the average African American is about 20% white, who pays the reparations? Peace out, bitches.
Okay, that's a good one.
Government, the same government. If the Japanese ancestors and ancestry can get reparation, and if Jewish heirs from the Holocaust can get ancestry and reparations, why can't black people? I mean, this isn't punitive against white people. I don't even know why that's even a thought.
Did you watch Distributus's video about reparations?
Yeah,
I didn't, but we talked ad nauseum about it.
Well, yeah, I might invite him to have a separate debate about reparations. That, however, is not.
I would love to have it. Yeah.
Okay.
I would love to have it. It seems like a lot of white people think that like reparations is like punitive against them, but like the same thoughts weren't happening when reparations were given to intern Japanese and like Holocaust victims. Sure. Like I don't get that.
Very good. Let's go to Ben with another question here. Ben, do you have a question?
Okay, my next question for Shooting the Breeze is very similar to my last question for Ryan. And because I asked Ryan how long you think it would take for him to, implement his idea.
Ryan's not here.
Yeah, my question for Shooting the Breeze is, you seem to have suggested that there will be this period during which we'll have things like affirmative action, which treat blacks or people of color, colored people, differently from whites, and that whites will think this is tyranny. My question is, how long do you think we need to have policies that treat non-whites different from whites before we're done with that?
Forever, apparently.
Well, affirmative action has been fantastic for white people, right? The greatest beneficiary of affirmative action has been white women. Like that every study has shown that, right? So it's been a boon for white people in general. But yeah, these policies, remember, they're being enacted and prescribed by white people, right? So my guess would be until we have a more diverse power structure with women and Latinos and blacks and Asians making these decisions, some of these policies may come to an end, some of them may not. But as long as white people are making the decisions, that's what we're going.
I'm looking for a number of years or a number of decades.
You're looking for a number of years or a number of decades?
Yeah, the same as I asked Ryan.
How would you feel about 100 years?
Okay.
That would mean.
So you think that it will be 100 years of affirmative, from 100 years of affirmative action is what you're prescribing?
Well, affirmative action, not necessarily. Like I said, affirmative action has only been a boon, has been the biggest boon. The biggest beneficiary has been white women in affirmative action. So that's been great for women, but racially, it hasn't really been that big of a boon to African Americans.
100 years of racial of policies that take race into account so as to prefer non-whites.
Not as to prefer non-whites, but to give non-whites the access that white people have had for generations beforehand.
That's bullshit.
Okay, so I think at that point
Name one inequality legally that exists right now. Name one.
Well,
name one inequality that exists legally.
You're not. Fritz isn't asking a question, and Killing the Breeze is not answering it because we are at time right now. So I'm going to end the broadcast right now. Thank you very much to our participants.
In my name, Fabrice.
One.
Let me quickly ask you.
No, you're not going to ask anything. The debate is over. And Anarcho, you're not going to ask anything either. The debate is over, gentlemen. I'm going to end the broadcast. People can ask things in private.
Okay.
Thank you very much to our
the debate is over.
Guess I won.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much to our participants. I hope we can have more of these Oxford debates. They will be heavily moderated at all times. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Have a good night.